Hey everyone, I'm NornQueenAlexis and welcome back to the channel. Today, joining me as always is Sterling.
I feel like always is a strong word.
Well, for this series.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So. Sterling, you are a military historian with like at least 600,000 years of military experience, is that correct?
600,000 may be a bit of a stretch, but yes, I am a classically trained historian. I specialized in U.S. Army history specifically, so I will be making references to a lot of that stuff. But today we're getting to something I'm a bit more familiar with than tanks and non-existent super tanks, and that is armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles.
Now, I do want to point this out because everybody loves to be a military expert in the comment section, which they're not. But we are doing this just with no script and no planning. We just kind of get together and we talk about the tank. Today, we're taking a look. We're going to need this.
I'll just take that.
We're going to take a look at the Chimera. Wow, that was perfect.
That was beautiful.
I am so skilled. I didn't plan that at all, like literally.
The fact we're shocked should tell everyone it's not scripted.
Okay, so the Chimera is kind of iconic in the 40k universe. It is pretty much the go-to, one of the most iconic tanks next to the Leman Russ and the Land Raider, I would say, and the Baneblade. Pretty much the Imperial vehicles are very iconic, but this one, it doesn't see a lot of play too much anymore, but it used to see a lot of play back in the day.
It used to be ubiquitous, and now you'll see like 2 to 3 in most games I've seen.
Yeah, or you'll see one of its variants, and that's something we're covering today as well. We're going to be covering the Hellhounds and its variants, because there's a lot of them, like the Chem Tank. We're going to be looking at the Hydra and the whichevers are in this book. So let's dive right into this thing. Do you want to read some of this to get some of the...
Yeah, sure. Let's go through the lore the first time through. So the Chimera is a very versatile vehicle, and over the millennia, it has been pressed into service in a variety of different forms. The basic Chimera chassis is used for more vehicles than any other, providing the basis of vehicles as diverse as Basilisk's artillery and Hellhound flamethrower tanks to command vehicles and ambulances. The most common version is the armored personnel carrier with turret-mounted multi-laser and hull-mounted heavy bolter, but these weapons can be replaced with other heavy weapons to fulfill a variety of roles.
Now, I do want to point this out. We are filming in Games U here in...
Technically Gilbert, almost Mesa, Arizona.
Like we're right outside by like one street.
Like the street we can see from the front door is the other side of town.
So we do apologize about background noise. So the Chimera being used as an ambulance. I actually found this out when I first read through this. I thought they used Thoraxes for that, but it turns out it's the Chimera.
Yeah, when it comes to battlefield ambulances, you use what's available. There are 2 different forms of extracting somebody from a battlefield as a casualty. There is medevac, or medical evacuation, or a casevac, a casualty evacuation. The difference between the two, the medevac is a purpose-built and modified vehicle used for medical extractions. A casevac is anything with at minimum 2 tires and an engine and an injured personnel. And we actually have versions of things like the Humvee, the high mobility, multi-purpose wheeled vehicle.
Is that what Humvee stands for?
Yeah, high mobility, multi-purpose wheeled vehicle.
Huh. I did not know that.
Yep. There are versions of that just like you hear here in the Chimera, where the basis of the vehicle is the same across everything. It's just the extra bits you throw on the back. So the ambulance version has spots for stretchers, it's got a heater inside of it, places to store medical equipment. If you take that off, it looks like a regular Humvee, same as everything else. So, and you'd probably see that same thing in a Chimera system, and we're going to see that when we get to the different weapon systems that actually get thrown onto this sucker.
All right.
You want to take the next section?
The Chimera's primary function is to accompany tanks into the battle whilst providing protection to an infantry squad within. Infantry can then disembark to supply the tanks. Wow, I have this thing in my way and it's like bugging the hell out of me. It's like messing with my eyes. The Chimera... To support the tank, the Chimera's weapons also provide heavy fire support. Wouldn't really say heavy, but then again, it is a rapid fire gyro rocket grenade launcher thing. So yeah, I would say
It's
that's
bolter. It's never a small thing.
yeah, or it's a multi-laser, and that's shooting at the speed of light.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's high firepower.
It's high firepower.
When providing high firepower in an attack, an infantry-borne heavy weapons are
Yep. When infantry-borne heavy weapons are difficult to deploy and use as the squad is on the move.
Okay. So they more than likely store their heavy weapons in the back of it before they deploy
Yeah.
and secure the area and then get out their heavy weapon.
Yeah, and so we don't really see mechanized infantry coming around until the 1930s, where we see things like the Bren gun carrier used by the British Army. Later, so many of those would be captured that the German Wehrmacht would actually put them into service. And that was a tiny little 4-person carrier that is ridiculously small. But the idea that you have to move your infantry at the same speed as your tanks is something that we really saw in the 30s and 40s, and their role has slowly shifted more and more and more, and that's why in the modern day, every country has its own variant of one of these things, because they are meant to be just utilitarian, good in any environment you're going to be in, carry your troops around sort of vehicles.
All right.
So standard tactical doctrine states that after racing towards its objective, the Chimera's access ramp will crash down, disembarking the infantry, who will move forward rapidly. Meanwhile, the Chimera's heavy weapons lay down a barrage of fire on the objective. As the squad nears the objective, the Chimera will reverse away to find a new firing position and cover itself, but still able to fire in support of the squad. There it will wait on standby, ready to race forward again and collect the squad should they need evacuating or moving to another position on the battlefield. Yeah, that's a standard like assault from a vehicle.
Just run in, drop off, and then get a secured position.
Yeah.
Like hold down it.
Yeah, whenever you are fixing an enemy position with fire, so you are just firing on the position to keep their heads down so they cannot engage and interact with your troops that are on the ground. That is the first stage to any assault on an objective. The infantry squad, so say we have our Chimera here, he's firing off at the objective ahead. The infantry squad will circle around, get a flank on the objective, and then they'll call in a ceasefire to the Chimera, at which point it will reposition to a better position for the next part of the operation, and then they will assault through the objective. So yeah, it's pretty basic stuff. The idea of the ramp crashing down on the ground, a lot of people don't think about this, but it's something that sadly happens every once in a while. Those ramps usually are just being held up. Gravity will swing that giant armor ramp down, and we see injuries happen with Strykers and Bradleys in the modern US military, where if someone is not paying attention, a giant several 100-pound piece of metal can just swing down, break an arm, break a foot, take a leg. These things are no joke, and they go down fast, and when you get out, you hustle out. Like, everyone can spill out of that vehicle in a matter of seconds. It is not like a long, drawn-out process.
And with actual vision ports on the top of it, they can see what they're running into.
Yeah.
Or at least the commander can tell them where certain enemies are.
Yeah, and having a little bit more awareness is always handy. A lot of infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers, they have the ramps on the back. That's because unlike the Land Raider, the Land Raider disgorges a bunch of guys who are walking around with their own cover bolted onto them.
With an A-10 Warthog strapped to their wrist.
Yeah. Meanwhile, regular humans don't like bullets, so you put the mass of the vehicle between all the infantry coming out of it and whatever could be firing. Mm-hmm. And usually, if you are disembarking, there will be a safe side that is declared, so it will stop at a slight angle. And the safe side will be whatever side is actually shaded by the silhouette of the vehicle from the incoming fire.
Okay, so in other words, the vehicle will come in and turn. I wish we had a Chimera. We should have brought one ahead. And they would come in this way. Or if the vehicle went this way, they'd come in this way.
Safe side right, safe side left. And that's just because the enemy position over here is always going to be firing on the big, heavy target until the infantry are able to get away. So,
now, funny thing, in the book Cadian Honors, they do that exact thing when fighting against gangers towards the middle part of the book. And they actually do tell them what side to get out of the tank.
Yep.
So
yeah, it's not a far cry from just basic common sense, essentially. Like, you don't want to run out of a cramped little metal box and into a bunch of fire, so you communicate with the crew itself.
unless you, of course, know the tank is about to be hit by, like, artillery or something.
Even then, I'd rather be inside of the big metal box as opposed to outside the big metal box that's about to get exploded.
Oh, that's fair.
Personal preference on that one. I
Yeah.
feel like I have slightly better odds.
Okay, my bad. My military advice, not the greatest. Sterling is here for that exact reason.
All right. Well, moving on. As well as firepower, protection, and mobility, a Chimera offers its squad other advantages. They do not have to carry heavy equipment by hand and are therefore less likely to suffer from fatigue during long advances. The vehicle carries extra equipment such as med kits and radios, giving the infantry fast access to new orders and information on the battlefield situation. Extra storage means more ammunition is close at hand, all of which makes mechanized infantry a far more efficient instrument of war than their foot-slogging counterparts. Boy, don't I know that.
Well, think about it this way. You can either take a Chimera and be smart, or get on a horse. Which one would you rather?
Well, depends on the year, but eventually we'll get to the aircraft, and then I can talk about airborne troops, but I was an airborne infantryman for a good chunk of my career, and it sucks carrying all of your stuff with you. Like, carry all your food, all your ammunition, the batteries for your radios, and all those stuff. Like, light infantry is miserable because you carry all your crap. Mechanized infantry guys, they get to just have all of their things on the vehicle or near the vehicle. They have, like it says, storage for a lot of things. More modern versions of, like, the Bradley and the Stryker, the Americans' versions of infantry fighting vehicles. They sometimes can be equipped with heaters and AC units, so it's not the worst thing in the world to be riding around some blasted hellscape and, you know, at least not be hot.
Now, we also know that the inside of these vehicles are voids capable, apparently.
Yeah.
They are completely insulated, which does offer more protection from, like, poisons and gases, which are used in 40K, which are usually not used in current war.
Yeah.
There is the occasional somebody uses one, but
Yeah, the occasional someone breaks a rule. But yeah, it is very nice to be able to just not have to show up to a fight absolutely smoked. Recon platoons, ranger battalions, like, everything you do getting ready for a fight is about, okay, we will get to the place, we'll set all of our stuff down, we'll rest for about 15 minutes while the leaders go and recon the final objective. When they come back, everyone will be nice and rested, we can get up, and then we can actually go and assault the objective. Being able to just do that from a vehicle that is receiving radio updates constantly, it probably has some sort of sensor system in it, it's just so much better. You can operate at a much higher tempo than if everyone is walking around everywhere.
so far it sounds like you're saying that this is one of the most crucial vehicles in war.
Yeah, and I am a little bit biased because I am an infantry guy. I am one of the, God's forsaken children. But there is a lot to be said about boots on the ground are what win wars, and if you can't get your infantry places, you've already lost most of the battle. So yeah.
Now, this is assuming we're talking about this even with air support. These things are almost mandatory, aren't they?
Yeah, you can drop bombs as much as you want on a location, but no one is controlling that location. Like, the enemy could just swoop right in while your bombers are off refueling or rearming, and then you've done nothing except expend ammunition. If you have a line of infantry, they can hold a fight, they can force the enemy to congregate in a certain location. Like, infantry are crucial to the way modern wars are fighting, and a mechanized infantry unit, like, they are able to just redeploy big guns on fast vehicles to locations where they're needed, and they also happen to bring their own infantry support.
And of course, the Trojan support carriers can actually come and re-weaponize these things, like bringing ammunition and everything.
Oh yeah, like
And-
munition convoys and stuff like that are really kind of fascinating if you think about it. Like,
Now, there was also something else we talked about, and this was in the Lehman Russ video, is how quickly from orbit to ground they can drop vehicles. So at 1,200 miles per hour, not kidding, that's how fast the Valkyrie goes. I forget its kph, I do apologize. But about 1,200 miles per hour, it can
Yeah.
swoop down, drop either a giant bunker filled with equipment, it can drop one of these, it can drop a Baneblade, the bigger variants can drop a Baneblade, the smaller variants can drop a Lehman Russ, or they could just drop whatever is needed. A Valkyrie drop with just ammunition could come in handy and really support these vehicles.
oh yeah, the ability to get these things places quickly is kind of awesome, and we're actually going to see just how fast these things are when we get to the stats of them. But yeah, the Chimera is fantastic. Okay, but let's wrap up the little fluff piece, and then we can show people what's really exciting about these things.
I know, right? I'm excited.
Yeah. So variants of the basic Chimera are common, mounting different weapons. The Heavy Flamer variant is a popular model amongst troops operating in dense terrain where the enemy can be close by, such as buildings or jungles. Usually one Heavy Flamer Chimera will be deployed in every 3 standard Chimeras as a standard infantry close support vehicle if Demolishers, Thunderers, or Hellhounds are in short supply. The Forge World of Griffin 4 produces its own unique Chimera variant, armed with twin-linked heavy bolters. Although not as powerful against armored vehicles, the heavy bolters can lay down a hail of high-explosive bolts that make it particularly effective against dense infantry formations, Tyranid swarms, and Ork mobs. Chimeras equipped with autocannons are used to fulfill a light anti-vehicle role.
Now, I've always thought that one as a bit unneeded, if that makes sense.
It's unneeded in the game, but it's unneeded in the game because, like it says in the core rulebooks for every edition for forever long, all the battles in Warhammer 40k are the final, like, penultimate battle, or their skirmish that both sides has prepared for. In a real-world conflict, you're going to need something that could potentially take out a light enemy vehicle. So say 2 Chimeras come up against each other, and we go way back to the armor value days of, fighting. An autocannon has a chance of dealing damage. If you have, say, the Griffon 4 pattern, where it's heavy bolter, heavy bolter, heavy bolter, and you meet an enemy Chimera, you can't damage it. The autocannon wins in that fight.
Now, again, keeping in mind that these are gyro rockets and technically they can use Kraken rounds and pop through the tank,
Yeah.
but guardsmen are not issued with them standard, so it's very rare for a heavy bolter. Keep in mind, this edition, yes, the heavy bolter can damage all things.
Definitely can, and does it really well.
Yes, it does damn near well,
Yeah.
and it just got a bonus. But an autocannon was always the go-to anti-light infantry vehicle.
Yeah, the exception proving the rule is a thing that, as a historian, we have to deal with all the time. People love finding niche arguments that are, oh, but this one time it was used for this one thing. It's like, yes, those situations happen, but the law of averages kind of dictates how history actually falls out. So if the law of averages says, I may not always have a Baneblade or a Lehman Russ to fight enemy vehicles, mixing in some autocannon capable, like, chimeras is a totally valid option.
And with how quickly the weapon can be switched out here, you can actually take an infantry autocannon and mount it on top of this vehicle,
Yeah.
which is crazy to think about, but there are actual stories of jury-rigged vehicles. In fact, there's actually rules for it right now, where they either ran out of ammunition, they had the heavy weapon inside this vehicle, or they just had to do it. And they got out and they took the autocannon and started popping people.
And that's something that we have in the modern day. It's called a universal weapon carrier. So if I have a vehicle and we have no more 50 caliber ammunition, but we do have 7.62 ammunition, and we have the 7.62 machine gun for the U.S. Army, the M204. Well, I can take the 204 and throw it on top of that vehicle in the same carrier and now it's just it can't fight against certain targets as much anymore, but still has a weapon and can still run around and engage targets as it needs to. So having the ability to swap out weapons, especially on infantry-focused vehicles, is crucial because an infantry's mission will change depending on the day.
And especially fighting something like Chaos, where they can literally throw anything at you.
Yeah, it would be super handy to be able to take your gun that no longer has ammunition and swap it out for something that you have excess ammunition of. So yeah. All right, let's take a look at some tech specs.
Woo!
Woo!
Our favorite part. So
It
I
is
went
for me.
ahead and I did up some of the stats in for Americans to understand.
Yep. And I have comparisons as well, so.
There we go. See, we actually kind of prepared, but we didn't write a script, obviously. So we have two different styles of Chimera here. We have the Griffon 4, and we also have the... Wait, they're both the same.
They're both Griffon 4s, but these ones have... They're made from Griffon 4, but one is the true Griffon 4 pattern. The other one is a heavy flamethrower variant.
All right.
So, you know, because that was a thing at one point. You could... I think you still can put a heavy flamethrower on the turret.
Yes, you can.
Yeah. At one
You can
point, you
actually put
never
a heavy
wanted
flamer
to.
and heavy flamer.
Yeah, which I believe is that's what this one is. But yeah, so let's talk numbers and stuff.
Numbers are fun.
Numbers are fun. So I think that infantry fighting vehicles are insanely fascinating, especially because of the sheer amount of variety you have with them. You have things that are essentially miniature tanks, like the BTRT, which is the Russians' cobbled together answer to Chechen insurgents back in the 90s. You have the M2A3 Bradley, which is the modern day fighting vehicle we use in the US military for heavy duty fighting. And then you have the others, things like Strikers, the Puma, the Warrior, and these are all like incredibly fine. But when I started looking through what had what and what stats were closest, it was the Bradley and the BTRT, which are essentially mini tanks, that came closest to the Chimera. So let's just like roll through some of those so people can see. So for tons, TONNES, that's going to be long tons, not short tons. Which
And there is a difference between that, right?
there is. It's only like 30, 40 pounds when we're at this sort of scale, but it's essentially, do you use the British version of a ton or do you use the American version of a ton?
And I'm going to take a wild guess that a British company used a British.
Yeah, that would be my guess. So I went ahead and did the conversions and figured out the weights of all these vehicles in long tons just to make it make sense. So the Chimera is sitting at 38. That's 2,205 pounds.
Or the size of Yo Mama.
Ooh.
I'm sorry.
You can tell we don't have a script. Okay, so a Bradley sits at 27.6 tons, so the Chimera's got a bit more on it weight-wise. But the Chimera actually weighs 0.5 tons less than the Russian BTRT.
Okay, so it's feasible.
It is 100% feasible, and because we know how crazy the armor plating is on the Chimera, from seeing all of its stats and everything, it makes sense that they would essentially use a tank chassis and then just gut out the tank, throw in a bunch of infantry quarters, throw a turret on it. It actually, it tracks, unlike the Lehman Russ does.
Yeah, the Lehman Russ is just hilarious looking.
Yeah, it is. And actually, for those who are off in YouTube land right now, if you want to see, probably the vehicle that the design for the Chimera was ripped off of, you're going to be looking for the BMP-1. I would attempt the Russian, except my Russian is atrocious because I don't speak it as much as I should. But it's essentially their first version of an armored personnel carrier / infantry fighting vehicle. It has the same sort of track silhouette. The tracks are covered, of course.
Yep.
Something that
and
the
now
40K ones miss.
we do know that these tracks can be covered.
Yes.
So we do know that all of this is technically covered.
Yep.
So only this part is exposed most of the time.
Most of the time. But yeah.
And yes, I did check the rules. It does exist in 8th and 9th edition. I was mistaken.
There you go. We admit our mistakes. But yeah, so it's the same sort of design, portholes, like door at the back. The BMP was angled. The fuel case for the BMP was actually in the doors in the back, so if you shot it in the back, it just went up.
Awesome.
Yeah,
That's safe.
Yeah, the only exits are also the fuel tanks. Yeah, they
Now,
quickly updated the vehicle.
This on the side, I'm pretty sure is not an infantry hatch.
No, I don't think it is either. Like I looked at a Chimera I had at home because I knew we'd be hitting on these, and I have no idea what that is.
I think it's just extra stowage.
It could be. Like it's not like sculpted on as a latch or anything like that, but it's a cool little detail.
Yeah. Now we do know where the the suspension actually is. We do know that, again, GW doesn't know where a skirt should end.
Yep.
So this thing would be dragging on the ground the entire time.
Yeah, it would be just digging up ruts. But the rest of the stats, like, it actually makes a lot of sense. Like,
this is where the skirt should end.
Yep.
Just so everyone is aware. And if the skirt ended there, and we're going to go with that for this video, if the skirt ended here, this tank actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. It's a little tall, but it's not as tall or as long or as wide as you would think is unfeasible. So let's just hit those up, right?
So its length, we're looking at a length of 22.63 feet.
Yeah, so 6.9 meters for those of you playing in places that use logical base 10 measurements.
I'm here for the Americans. Don't you worry, dumb Americans. I got you.
This is why I want to be a teacher so bad. So when we look at the Bradley and we look at the BTRT, they're both shorter. They both clock in at 6.55 meters for the Bradley, and the Burt T locks in at 6.45. So
not too far off.
It's half a meter, so that's like
15 inches?
It's barely over a foot and a half, or barely under a foot and a half. So it's not any sort of amount that anyone would like scoff at as like, oh, that's just far too big of a difference.
Yeah.
Unlike the Lehman Russ, where it was just crazy out of proportion.
Yeah, the tank is.
Yeah,
It's essentially a mobile home coming at you.
pretty much. I mean, width is a little chunky.
Its width is 18.7 feet or 5.7 meters.
Yeah, so again, like we ran into with the Lehman Russ, if this thing showed up on Earth, it's going to have trouble navigating some basic roads. Is it something that's out of like reason? No. I mean, Ogren are a thing, and they ride around in these things all the time, so I imagine you want a little bit more space.
Yep.
But the Bradley is going to come in at 3.6 meters, so around 12 feet.
And one more thing that I do want to point out. Since the Inquisition uses these things a lot, there is the chance that Space Marines get deployed in them.
Yep.
Now, rules-wise, that can't happen, except you can put an Inquisitor and Terminator armor inside it, if it can transport it. So they did have the FAQ that this thing cannot transport Terminators. But at the beginning of 8th edition, you could put Karamazov inside of anything.
Sad Terminators are sad.
But anyway, back in the day and in the RPG books, you can actually fit Terminators and everything inside these. Because Ogren are actually bigger than Terminators.
Yep. It just makes sense.
Terminators stand at 3 meters tall, a little over 9 foot.
Yep.
The average, and I actually did all the math for this and everything and used our life-size counterparts that are standing here in this store and everything. Measured them all out, and a Primaris Marine stands at about 7'5", 7'6". No, it's 8'6". They stand about a head taller than a Marine, but it's only a few inches.
Yep.
But model-wise, it looks incredibly different.
It does.
But that's because the models are not measured correctly.
Yeah, not to scale with one another.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so width-wise, like I was saying, so 5.7 for the Chimera, 3.6 on the Bradley, and the BTRT, 3.27. So, you know, it's 6 feet wider on average than most of its modern-day real-world counterparts.
That's not horrid.
It's not horrific. Like, that is very true. It's not crazy out of scale, once again. And then we get to the height, and this is where it suffers from the Lehman Russ syndrome.
Yeah, 3.72 or a height of 12.2 feet.
For those of you playing at home, you know what's coming next. The real-world counterparts are shorter.
Yep.
And the Bradley is a very tall vehicle, so the fact that this thing is taller than a Bradley, it's coming up there with some modern military trucks, like semis that we use, like 2-ton trucks and whatnot, and that is very tall. Like, you are so going to get seen before you get anywhere, but conversely, you have a big field of view for your gun.
Yep, and when we do talk about this thing, we have to keep in mind the 40K universe, they do have Space Marines and things of that nature. Things are bigger
Things are
in 40K.
taller than the average human.
But at the same time, that doesn't mean that the tank shouldn't be shorter. In fact, the tank should be as short as possible if everything's taller than it.
Yep.
Because it blocks line of sight.
Yep. You can't hide if you're taller than all the stuff around you.
Yep. And it's very easy that they could lose a couple of feet on this tank.
It wouldn't be hard.
They can cut off all of this, and the tank lowers its profile by almost 1.5 feet.
Yeah. You can't carry as many Ogren in that case, but
They should have a special
they should have
one
a version, yeah.
Yeah. But it is a utility vehicle that is mass-produced, and even back in the day in World War II when we mass-produced tanks, and Russia mass-produced tanks, they didn't really make them perfect. They just kind of threw them out there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, when you're just doing lowest common denominator manufacture and use, you want to make the thing very simple, very rugged. That usually does mean you have to go for bigger parts, just because a small finicky part gets broken easy. So building things up, not the worst sin in the world for this thing. Because again, it is still not as crazy tall as
like the Lehman
Russ or something like that. Because 3.7, all right, it's 12 feet tall. Considering everything else, it's like 2.9 or 2.8, 2.4. Like, we're talking about a difference of feet. So again, it very much falls in line with the modern equivalents, which we know work in the real world and are very effective at their tasks. And even the ground clearance, like that one, unlike the Lehman Russ, where
This one actually has ground clearance, but the Lehman Russ we also saw was completely wrong.
it was completely out of scale for a human being running next to it. And the Chimera, like the model is actually modeled like lower to the ground. It is slightly more in scale too, and being 0.45 meters.
0.45 meters. Yeah.
Okay, so again, we're talking about like just north of 2 feet for ground clearance on the like underside. Bradley is going to be sitting there at 0.46. So we're talking like a difference of inches. And the BTRT is again 0.46. Like ground
This
clearance,
is
this thing
accurate.
works. It doesn't have a V-shaped hole underneath it, which is a personal gripe of mine. I am a child of the global war on terror, so mines and IEDs are a thing I think about. But
And they should be thinking about in 40K, considering that minefields were always a thing all the way up until like 7th edition.
yep,
And it's pretty much the primary way of taking out any walker or tank in the game.
yeah, just
Up
let
to
it
that point.
roll dangerous terrain and then get immobilized.
Yep.
Yep.
Now, I want to take a look at one of the pictures really quickly, just to show you, well, not you, but the viewers, because you already know this. We can actually see some of the ground clearance right here, but what I'm really looking for, not the formations, because we're going to get to those. This actually shows you where the tank treads actually sit and everything, which we really like to look at. But again, we'll get to that. This shows you just how high up this thing sits, and this one as well. This is the Salamander. Technically, it is a Chimera chassis, though today it is not.
Yep.
It did get its own kit, and it's slightly smaller, and you cannot use, in tournaments, you can't use the Chimera version of it. But we just want to see the ground clearance on this thing compared to the Lehman Russ, which is right next to it. And you can even tell, even as far back as that tank is, how much bigger it is than this one. And there was another picture in here that I want to show because this one. It shows you just how wide this thing is on even an Imperial road, where the roadway is that big. We can see that it's just slightly bigger than this tank by maybe 3 feet. So tanks and roads in 40K are very much equivalent to today's roads.
Yeah, which makes sense. Like, humans don't change that much in size. So our transportation methods normally don't, so our roads don't.
Yep, and typically we'd be looking for planets in the Goldilocks zone, which means that the gravity upon the planet is this very similar to Earth.
Very close to human standard gravity, temperature, atmosphere, like lots of desirable things mean we're going to end up with a lot of the same design features.
Yep, and since those are the primary worlds that the Golden Age of technology built for, and that is true, you would find a lot of these tanks have to be at least equivalent to Earth.
Yeah, at least able to operate in like an Earth-like environment.
Yep. Now, of course, there is Jupiter, Mars, which have different gravities. There is void-born humans that are much taller.
Yep. There's people who live on moons like Titan inside space stations and things like that.
With artificial gravity, but it's probably matching that of an Earth or a Goldilocks zone planet.
Yep.
Anyway, getting back to this.
Yeah, focus.
We're good.
So speed. This thing is fast.
It is?
It's really fast for a heavily armored vehicle like itself. So 70 kilometers an hour.
Which is 43.5 miles per hour.
Yeah. So a Bradley is 20 kilometers slower. Caps out around 56 kilometers an hour. The BTRT caps out at 50 exactly.
And this thing's doing 34, 55 kph off-road. So this thing's faster.
This thing's faster off-road than modern day infantry fighting vehicles are. In general. And this is like, I'm using the Bradley and the BTRT because they're both tracked examples. Something like the Striker, which is an 8-wheeled monstrosity of a transport, that thing can go highway speeds, like all the time. But that doesn't really tell you anything because it's less armor, it's different proportions. We're again referencing two very close real-world examples to show that this thing has it has some sort of wizardry in its engine if it is going that fast while still being as armored and as big as it is, because it's still bigger than both of its contemporaries.
Now, it could very well be the same engine. Where do we see the engine?
It's the Vulcanor 16 twin-coupled multi-fuel. So it is not the same one.
No, it's a different engine.
It's only 16 cylinders.
Only 16
Only 16 cylinders. It's not like it's using a gas turbine engine or anything like that as far as we know, but that is ridiculously fast. I mean, that thing goes so far ahead and far afield from the Lehman Russes that this thing is a sports car by comparison when we talk about speed.
Oh, jeez.
A Lehman Russ is going to show up to the fight hours after these things arrive unless they coordinate together, which of course they would, but it's the fact that a Lehman Russ line could approach on an objective and then the Chimeras just swoop out at lightning speed by comparison and get on a flank, disembark their infantry, suppress an objective, and then the infantry advance through the objective. If we could get an armored vehicle like this that moved that fast, it would be revolutionary and game-changing.
Oh, jeez. So the Hellhound is actually, it's sounding like it's really good.
Yeah, the Hellhound would be ridiculous. There's that pesky, thing about don't use flamethrowers on people. But being as fast as Chimeras and Hellhounds are, that's something that you don't want to contend with in a modern military setting. The BTRT itself, its max off-road speed is 25 kilometers an hour. That's very close to the Lehman Russ's max off-road speed. So compare the two. One of these is able to go almost like standard US road speed, 45 miles an hour, get onto an objective, disembark 12 infantry. Some of them may be abhuman giants with, essentially shrapnel guns.
Yep.
And that is something that a Russian force of 5 guys jumping out of a small autocannon armored personnel carrier just can't contend with. So yeah, speed is king on the battlefield, and the fact that the Chimera is that fast shows just how good a Chimera can be.
So, unlike everything wrong with all the other tanks, we're actually praising this one.
Yeah, I do not like MacGuffin power sources, but if it was as fast as it claims to be, that is way too fast to ignore. That makes it a legitimate threat.
So, weapons.
Weapons. anything and everything. Just
This thing.
throw them on the front.
So let's go over a couple of the weapons really quickly. The multi-laser is a rapid-fire strength 6 weapon. Now this puts it as a weaker version of the las cannon, so its charge pack lasts a bit longer. But you can overcharge the multi-laser to a point but you damage you would damage it, but you could fire it as almost a las cannon. But that multi-laser is firing at the speed of light, because it is a laser.
Yep.
It has barely any kickback, if it has kickback at all, which we don't know the primary source in it that's kicking into the crystal that's firing it.
It's MacGuffin power.
Yeah, but it is a crystal, we know that.
Yeah, so, and then it has multiple barrels, so the heating of a barrel, due to all the energy, is going to be distributed across multiple barrels as opposed to...
Oh no, you're thinking of
Possible one
a
will
rotary gun.
Oh, that's right, I'm thinking of the other version.
Yeah, it's just a solid barrel, and it does superheat.
Pursue Forge World coming out with cool model versions.
I know, I'm sorry. But it does fire, it does superheat itself, it does need cooling period, and then it needs to fire again. But it usually fires 4 to 5 bursts before putting anything down. And we can see this in the Astartes animation, though it's not fully represented because that Astartes would be dead.
Yeah.
The speed and energy of that weapon would pass right through the armor and kill him. And yes, the Space Marine's armor can survive 16,000 degrees, but since we know that this thing is moving at light speed and is powered pretty much by plasma, it's not plasma, but it's almost at the same heat. When I ran my tests for it, it's going at about 30,000 degrees, and it is punching right through armor, and it is killing the person beneath it. Now, granted, Ceramite has a way of just... Yeah, but anyway.
That is for another episode.
And we will get to all of that, but the multi-laser is an excellent weapon. It is using the same cartridges that can be put into a las gun to fire it, though it does burn through the ammunition a lot quicker. You can put the ammunition pack on top of the vehicle to recharge it in sunlight if you have enough. So the multi-laser is actually one of the best infantry fighting weapons, and I don't get why heavy weapon teams can't take it. It literally makes perfect sense for them. Although it does give away your position instantaneously.
It gives away your position, and I have no idea what the justification would be for not allowing it, since las cannons, which have to use a comparable amount of power, they can run around with portable batteries.
Yep. Now, getting the multi-laser and praising the multi-laser enough, we move on to its other weapon, the Heavy Bolter. Heavy Bolter is a rapid-fire gyro rocket that punches into armor, then explodes on a timed detonator. I think I got that correct.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Now, its rounds are armor-piercing and usually about that thick. I have a few at home that are 2 scale, and it's really fun. They are more used for infantry fighting and heavy infantry fighting, and they can be used on very light tanks. Typically, they're not used for that. They're used for suppression because of the explosion, which digs into sandbags, digs into trees, digs into any fortification you're hiding in, and can actually punch through and then penetrate and then explode, and thus, well, make it so you can't use that, or put a giant cloud of smoke in front of you, which is another good reason to use the Heavy Bolter. Again, it's extremely loud, and it gives away your position once you fire it. The other weapon it has is the Heavy Flamethrower, which is a heavy flamethrower, and it does flamethrower things.
Yeah.
The Heavy Flamethrower primarily uses promethium, which is a mix of... It's napalm.
Yeah, it's totally generic napalm.
It is sci-fi napalm that can't go out. It burns through things and will kill Space Marines by cooking them alive.
Yep,
so,
and even just toxic fumes at that point.
Yep. So we know that it burns hotter than the re-entry temperature of the planet, which is 16,000 degrees. I could have that wrong, by the way, and I will look that up while we're talking about this, but I could have that wrong, so I do apologize if I do. But note this, promethium burns hotter than re-entry temperature, and that's why I can kill Space Marines.
Yeah.
So those are 3 weapons.
Internal game logic. There is one other version that we don't see in this book.
And that's the autocannon?
And it's the autocannon variant.
Which is weird because we have pictures of it, but I don't think it actually... Nope, that's the multi-laser.
That's the multi-laser with the shroud and everything.
There it is.
There it is, yeah.
And there's an Inquisition one.
There you go. But yeah, autocannons are the autocannon is the unsung hero of modern warfare, in my opinion. When you look at things like light machine guns, like the M240, I think I may have said 204 earlier, but anyways, they fire rounds that are in the 7 to 9 millimeter range as far as their caliber goes, and that harkens all the way back to the Bren gun, which fired at like an 8.6. An autocannon doesn't start becoming an autocannon until it hits 20 millimeters. So we're talking like 2 centimeters across the diameter of the actual cartridge itself. And they go all the way up to like 40, 75.
Oh, wow. I was way wrong about re-entry temperature. It's only 3,000 degrees.
There we go.
16,000 is the base level for plasma.
There we are.
That I had that confused. I do apologize. Delete your comment about it. I corrected myself. You still wrote that comment. I see you writing that comment. Stop it. Anyway.
Anyways.
So it burns hotter than 3,000
It
degrees.
burns harder than 3,000. But yeah, autocannons are this fun little category where it's just a cannon of a certain caliber definition that can fire in a semi-automatic fashion. So you aren't manually loading new rounds in, they go through magazines of them.
So it's just a giant handgun.
It's a cannon that fires on semi-auto. It's that basic and that simple, and it's a lovely little definition that I wish was used more. People tend to like going all the way up to the biggest round they can fire, find a way to shoot it semi-auto, and it's ridiculous. But like autocannons and auto chain guns, which is a thing that we currently use in the modern military, they'll fire anything from the 20 to the 40 millimeter range.
I think the scientific name of that is Burt gun.
No, and I want to like take a moment to talk about that. Mainly because chain gun, people think it's like, oh, that's a Gatling gun or that's something crazy. It's like, no, it just means that it's got a chain-powered drive in it that actually grabs and loads the individual rounds. So it's a mechanical definition. It has nothing to do with like the rate of firepower, like something like a minigun would, where that's firing hundreds and hundreds of rounds before you can even blink. Like a chain gun similar to the one that's on the Bradley, which I believe is called the Bushmaster, unless I'm mistaken, I might be. That thing's firing like big honker, like 20 millimeter rounds, but it's firing them at like a chugging pace. But because it is a chain-driven action system, it's firing them super reliably. Like there's very little chance that that thing's going to foul up on itself without any sort of, neglect or like poor maintenance on it. So yeah, that's what a chain gun is. Come at me.
That's what a chain gun is versus a Burt gun.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to quickly correct myself really quickly. Plasma starts at 11,000 degrees Fahrenheit. I did get these wrong. Re-entry temperature is 3,000 degrees. So obviously one is a lot higher than the other.
Yep. But
So-
plasma still definitely kills a Marine.
Yes, it does, regardless of where it hits them, by the way.
Yeah, numbers are hard, especially with as many that get thrown out around here.
Yep. So, taking a look at its turret placement and everything, is this good?
It's not bad at all. And like I was saying, like the BMP 1s and 2s, they have almost the exact same configuration of where the turret's located, the firing ports.
Wait, this is an actual thing?
The firing ports on an infantry fighting vehicle are 100% a thing. It was mainly kind of seen as I guess a joke is kind of the closest description of it. Like, you would never actually use them because the modern equivalent to this is an actual, like, swinging hatch that you swing open to fire out of. Like, the BMPs had teardrop-shaped ones. So you're essentially making arrow slits inside of the vehicle. But if you're using them, then the main guns should be able to engage the targets, or you can just get out and fire on them from a better position. So yeah, like firing ports are a thing. You don't see them a lot in modern infantry transports, but they were definitely a thing in the 60s and 70s where it was kind of considered like, oh, we're going to definitely need this. And then it turns out no one ever really did, and the whole kind of concept was sort of abandoned in favor of, hey, just don't get to a point where someone can get to you and your big gun can't get to them.
So, we see these being used in Dawn of War. And I think it's used pretty efficiently, because the Chimera is actually pretty fast in Dawn of War as well.
Yeah.
We're counting Dawn of War and Dawn of War 2, which has better animations for its vehicles and everything. But when the thing deploys, it is firing straight, but it's usually the infantry that are firing off to the side just to suppress everything else before the tank comes to a halt and the guys get out.
Yeah. Like extra fire on anything that's shooting at you makes them rethink shooting at you.
Yeah, who would have guessed?
Every little bit helps. But the idea of like a hard-mounted weapon in a fireport, that's a 40K-ism. There are actually like purpose-built versions of like the M16 that were made that slotted into firing ports on certain armored vehicles, but they were not ever just left sitting there. Like you never leave a weapon that can just be taken away by somebody sitting in a vehicle. So they would almost always be a purpose-built version.
Now, we do know that it is showing that there is a port and a person can stick the weapon out of, but in other art, they do show that the weapon is mounted in there, and that the vehicle itself comes with mounted weapons as well.
Yep. And a machine spirit that can shoot them, depending on the edition you're reading.
Yep. And sometimes depending on the lore.
Yep.
Because ghost machines are a thing in 40K. In fact, even the Tau have them now. And that was in the Farside Enclave book when the Tau commander, his AI chip from his mentor, kicked in and told him something that it could not know.
Yeah.
And Farside actually started questioning his faith and everything. And he started thinking that maybe there's more to this machine spirit than there actually is.
You can't see it right now, but I am shaking my head and just agog at all the madness that happens in 40K sometimes.
Well, I mean, the Tau do have a greater demon/god that protects them now.
Let's not do this now.
I know. Don't worry. We'll get to the Tau video.
We'll get to the Tau.
Now, what about
Like traversing 360. Yes, it's a thing.
Okay.
The elevation, so I was kind of surprised to see that they copy-pasted the figures from the Leman Russes here. Like certain Leman Russ variants had a -8 to a +25.
Yeah.
But because the Chimera is shorter than the Leman Russ, that actually helps. Because that's not a crazy deflection angle to have for your elevation. But now that you're shorter, you can actually hit things that are man-sized and not a football field away.
Well, that's good. It also has its front mountings a lot lower as well.
Yeah, the front mounting's a lot lower because the whole thing is just lower.
Sorry about that.
Having like front-mounted machine guns and whatnot, yes, it's a thing. Is it a thing on infantry fighting vehicles? Usually not. But that's because these things are meant to get to a position where the infantry can get out, and then the infantry go do their mission while this supports them. The Chimera in 40K, it apparently, according to the lore we just read, it's meant to be able to take on missions almost all on its own. But you would still not want a hard-mounted weapon on the very front of a vehicle, because then the front must always be facing the thing that you're trying to shoot, and that's always less than optimal.
Well, in this case, I would actually argue that it's more optimal because of how its armor is shaped in the front versus the side.
Yeah, there's that. But because you are so fast, are you always going to drive just straight towards the enemy?
Look, drive me closer. I want to hit them with my sword.
There we go.
I'm going to make the joke. But I do agree.
Yeah, the having the hard-mounted like bolter on the front is just
A bit of a waste?
It's a bit of a waste. Like, it's just something that you don't necessarily need when you're carrying around 12 infantrymen and you have, like, essentially broadside las guns and you have a 360-degree turret. It's a lot of extra added storage that you have to worry about, maintenance that you have to worry about, and then you have to add another crew member to it, which the crewmen in this are the commander, the gunner, and the driver.
This is interesting. The secondary armament only has 400 rounds, or 10 shots.
10 shots with the heavy flamer, yeah.
Well, this one has the heavy bolter. And heavy flamer. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that one through.
There you go.
Yeah, so contrary to what you'll see portrayed in like video games and movies and whatnot, military flamethrowers, yes, they still exist. They're mainly used by like engineer corps and things like that for clearing brush or starting a forest fire to create a fire break. Essentially, you burn the area of fire that you burn the area force that fire is about to get to, so that when it gets to it, there's nothing to burn.
Yeah, that way it already knows that it's a boy.
Damn. This year has been weird, hasn't it?
Look, I'm making jokes about forest fires at this point because this year is so messy.
104 days at time of recording. That's all we have left.
I know. I know.
But yeah, like when you're talking about like napalm and stuff like that, napalm is not like a liquid. It's usually a gel substance, and it's pushed through just like standard pressure systems.
Super soaker.
Pretty much. It's a very spicy super soaker at that point.
Spicy super soaker.
Spicy super soakers. But it's the mechanics that make your super soaker work, they're very close to what make classic flamethrowers work. And the fact that like napalm is a jellified substance, when you get it on something, it sticks to it. That's why it's so dangerous, is because it will stick to something and continue to burn. So you'll only get a certain number of shots before either you've used up all the fuel, or you've used up all the pressure you have and have to like reprime a tank or something like that. So
just imagining some guy in there just like with a bicycle pump, just like, I hate my job.
You wouldn't be wrong, because that's actually how the original like Greek fire style throwers created by the Byzantines, like over 1,000 years ago at this point, would have functioned. But yeah, so like it's not crazy to think that it's got only 10 shots worth. It's the 400 rounds of massive, essentially 40 millimeter gyro stabilized mass reactive grenades. That's just a lot of extra space that's being taken up.
Yep, and we're seeing 1,000 rounds, so this thing's only firing like 10 times.
Yeah, it is weird.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that thinks that would be real cool. And the
Like
other,
if that was a multi-laser and it had like 1,000 hours of shots,
yeah,
I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. But this is a heavy bolter, which is just thudding out shots.
just
So-
nonstop.
Yeah, that's holding the trigger down for like 10 seconds.
Yeah.
So this thing does need a lot more ammunition, but it's probably carrying it though.
It probably is, and we'll get to that when we look at the internals. Armor on this thing. It's the useless aggregate amount of armor. It tells us nothing.
Yeah, well, it says 150 in some spots, and the hull has 100, and
Yeah.
gun mantle has nada.
It says all these things, but it's just not true.
So let's actually take a look at this thing. And just for your sake, we're going to do this so you guys can see the pretty box.
It's metal boxes.
Metal box. Anyway, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it.
Oh, please.
No.
Damn. All right. I tried, folks.
All right, let's see how many crew this thing has real quick.
It should be
think it only
3
has-
crew.
It has a total, where the heck is crew? Commander, gunner, and driver, so 3.
Got it.
So we
and-
know that the commander sits up here.
Yep, commander sits there. But I would actually think, because of the fact that it's only got a gunner, the commander may actually be sitting here in what we call the TC spot, the truck commander spot. So you have your driver, most junior guy in the group, manning this whole control yoke like surface up here. And look, there's even a handbrake.
And there's a foot pump.
Yeah.
Yay.
So the commander will probably actually be next to the driver, controlling where the vehicle is placed, as opposed to controlling when the vehicle fires. The commander would also have access to all the extra screens and radio equipment and everything like that.
Which this is the whole aux array, the comms equipment.
Yeah, everything routed through everything else. And then, yeah, you would just have the gunner up here next to all the ammunition, because there isn't a loader, so he's having to manually reload the weapon as he goes. That is a terrible job. It's not a lot of fun, especially because it's very high pressure reloading a supporting weapon.
If you get the tank angled to face your enemy, that could be another use for the main gun, the secondary gun.
Sure, yeah.
Just start popping as the other guy's reloading.
You totally could. And then you can't hear the radio. And you can't hear when the infantry call for a ceasefire.
So funny enough, in 40K you actually can, because microbeads can vibrate the inner part of your ear to the exact thing, so regardless of the sound outside, you'll be able to hear your orders.
Yes.
Yeah, microbeads.
Yep, yay microbeads. But what if I only have a headset?
That is the headset.
But what if I have the bad headset?
Oh, then you're dead.
See, there we go.
But just saying that there is equipment in 40K that can make up for some of this thing's
Sure.
weaknesses.
Yeah, I do want to say that like we do have a front hatch for the driver to get in and out in case of. I also like where it's positioned, as opposed to the Lehman Russ's like driver hatch, which was set further back. This one actually has like a field of view. He can actually see things on the left and right of his treads before he runs them over. And yeah, we even have like the rear hatch and everything here, which, you know, if you're loading in extra things and you have a crane system, that could be really handy. It could also be a second point of de-embarkation for a bunch of infantry riding inside in case something terrible happens.
Or like a rock falls on the back.
Or a rock
Everyone
falls
dies.
on the back, yeah. Or it could, what if this just gets jammed? Or what if the vehicle rolls? Like, having more than one way out is always super handy.
Now, what about that being in the front, though? Is that dangerous?
That's not that dangerous. Like, relatively speaking, you would just reinforce the crap out of this. And also, like, your driver needs to see anyways. So it's going to be like some sort of armored glass paneling
we
and
can
everything
see
like
it.
that. Yeah, you see the little hatch right here, see where it can swing up and everything. And there's just not really a safer way to let someone see outside of a giant metal box unless you are installing things like cameras and view screens. And this is 40K. We don't have time for that nonsense.
Sometimes they do, but yeah, a good chunk of the time they don't.
Yeah, by and large, you don't have the time.
Now, we can see that there are periscopes on here, which is good. They
Yeah.
actually cared about view in this
Yep,
case.
being able to see out of your turret is great. And even in the rear, we see that there are periscopes for the infantry inside the vehicle themselves. So if they're using the side-mounted las guns for defense,
They don't have to poke their heads out.
they don't have to poke their heads out, or just, hey, let me look outside real quick and make sure that I am exiting on the correct side before we drop the ramp. That can be immensely useful, having that level of situational awareness.
So, up top, we have the radio and communication equipment. Number 2, where the heck is that? Where do you see number 2?
There.
So apparently that's an oxygen tank
Yeah, I mean,
used in hostile environments. That makes sense. The commander system panel, I'd assume that's over here somewhere. For number 3.
no, looks like it's up here. So I guess the commander is in the top and the gunner is just running the secondary may not get used gun.
Yeah, that seems a little bit weird, but I mean, it's 40K. They have multiple roles. Let's see. Turret vision block. So yeah, we see where those are.
Yep.
The gun cradle mount.
Yep. So that would be your that would be this whole section right here. See this little pin that holds it all together? That's pretty much the version of the universal gun cradle that we use today. Like swap it out, take out the 50 caliber, put in a 40mm grenade launcher, take that out, put in a 240. Yeah. So there's the modularity we were talking about.
Yeah, so a lot of these things, they fully make sense for a modern day tank.
Yeah, and where
including
they're
medkits.
and where they're positioned actually makes sense as well. Now the medkit, if I were putting this together, I would keep the medkit up here in the storage area, but it doesn't look like it's there. It's number 30, and we know this must be so fascinating for everyone to watch us geek out over where everything is placed inside this thing.
I don't see number 30. Also,
Yep.
I have a big metal pipe in my way that's holding the camera.
I don't see it. You don't see it. It doesn't exist. They forgot it, which entirely possible.
Yeah, I mean, it is 40K.
It is 40K. Well, also just things get forgotten all the time because this is a simplified list of everything that's in here, not the, all right, medical kit. What goes in the medical kit?
Yeah.
Stretchers, C-collar, bandages, gauze wrappings.
By the way, if you
injections.
want to have fun, play a Dark Heresy game with me when I tell you how to, you actually have to get a med kit, you have to buy all the things individually, and you have to have like Forbidden Lore Human in order to stitch together certain wounds. Yeah, I go crazy with it.
Needle, towel, catgut, sugar.
Yeah, pretty much. Alrighty, so I think we're in agreement though. The Chimera.
It actually makes a lot of sense. It's like when I saw that it was so closely related to everything, it's like, this is not right.
So back in the day, the Chimera had a front armor of 12, so the bulk of its armor is in the front, obviously. And it actually has a better design than most of the tanks in 40k, where it can deflect.
Yeah, it's not a smooth, flat surface. And it doesn't go into a smooth, flat surface. It goes into another angled piece. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. So I gotta say, this tank, if this was built today,
it would kind of get laughed at for being a little big, but then once you put the gas pedal down and it started tearing off at that speed, I think everyone would stop questioning it and they'd put in a lot of orders for it. Especially just 12 guys riding in the back. The Striker it's lighter armored than this thing. It's about the same size dimensions as far as length goes, like not width, obviously, but that carries about 12 guys. But that's not a super heavily armored pseudo tank like the Bradley or the BTRTR, and those will carry 6, maybe 5 guys. So this deploying an entire squad of infantry at speed, like even if you just had modern day weapons on it, it would be a phenomenal vehicle.
there you go.
There you go.
The Chimera, which I still think is the best designed tank for the Imperial Guard,
Yeah.
aesthetically, is actually accurate. It is the best design. So let's take a look at its variants in this video.
Yeah.
And starting with the Salamander Scout vehicle, and at almost 45 miles per hour, this thing could scout, couldn't it?
It could scout. When we get to like how it's designed and everything, it's an open topped, which is surprising but not unheard of. Because if you want to look around, it's very easy to look around if you don't have a roof to worry about.
Yeah, but it also sounds like you're just begging to be shot.
Yeah, and we'll get to that.
So do you want to read this, or do we want to skip it? Because it's pretty much...
We'll skip.
Activate skip mode.
Activate skip. Advance.
Okay, so taking a look at this thing, it looks to be armed with an autocannon, but it's a front mounted with no turret. It doesn't spin.
Yeah, but it's fast.
Yeah, but it's fast.
It's very fast. This one, so the Salamander is actually, it's about 5 tons lighter than the Chimera, and if I remember...
It's faster.
Yeah, it's like 100 kilometers an hour.
Yep.
So for those of us who live in the Land of Freedom units, it's going like close to 65, 70 miles an hour.
Well, I'll take a look really quickly. It is going 100, that's 1,000. It's going 62 miles per hour.
Yeah, it's going freeway speeds on the roads, and then it's going 45 miles an hour, maybe a little slower, around 40 for off-road. And as far as like its actual size and dimensions and everything goes, because it is the Chimera-based chassis, it's pretty much the same stat block as far as everything else is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
The design elements that make this work as a scout vehicle, though, are the fact that it is open top and it is using all of the extra space to house all sorts of other like extra things for a weapon, long-range communication systems, a backup system, like everything you would need to run a scout mission. It's all here where the crew would be in a standard Chimera.
Yeah, and this is only 3 men.
Yeah, like it's a super small, super little nippy thing. Having like a hard locked weapon is not it's not a disadvantage if you are faster than everything else on the battlefield.
Yeah, but again, it does have the heavy bolter or heavy flamethrower side secondary weapon.
Yeah.
But this thing is going to be aiming forward, so the heavy bolter is actually going to shoot.
Yeah.
This thing is sitting at 33 tons, which is lighter than the Chimera.
Mm-hmm.
And its rotation is slightly less at -3 to 24, so 1 degree less.
Yep.
It only has 500 rounds for its autocannon, which is a lot. Is that a lot?
Yeah, it's good for one fight, and then you'll probably want to leave. Because it is an autocannon, it means that this would be almost dedicated against light vehicles.
So this thing would be killing like supply runs.
Yeah, this thing could be used as hand runs. The autocannon could be used to defend itself in case it ran into another Chimera or like some sort of patrol. It could be used as an ambush weapon, or honestly, you shoot it at a Goliath truck that's bringing supplies in.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are all not just valid options, but probably the smart option.
So you're going to be hitting, if it's an alien vehicle, you're going to be hitting the Ork truck. You're going to be hitting the Tau. What is their basic transport
The
called?
Devilfish.
The Devilfish. You're going to be hitting the Eldar one, which is the Wave Serpent.
Yeah.
Which this thing can actually fight. Like, autocannons can fight those transport vehicles.
Yeah, and autocannons are one of those, again, they're unsung heroes in my mind, just because they can take this whole middle class of vehicles where a tank is kind of overkill, but infantry vehicles can't touch it, and an autocannon usually is able to handle it, like, very effectively. And you don't have to have this be your frontline combat vehicle, and that's why having it braced and stuck in the forward position is fine. Because it's not going to be put in situations where it is fighting a million forces surrounding it at any given time. And honestly, if that happens, you just grab your lasgun carbine, pop your head out the back, and start shooting at things as you drive away.
Yeah. Or you just, drive away at 65 miles per hour.
Yeah, like that is so fast for something that, like, it still has the armor complement of a Chimera. It just has it placed in different positions. And
I actually think it has more. No, 150 is the same.
Yep, 150 is the same.
So let's take a look at its systems and everything and see what else it has.
Yeah, so we've got everything for the driver that you would expect. We've got a standard steering column for, everything in the Imperium uses the same sort of system. It looks like a driving yoke, honestly, which not surprising. Gear shift, brake lever, like under-seat stowage space. Yes, we do like hiding snacks under our seats in vehicles. This is, jokingly, we call it pogey bait, but it's good, it's delicious, and sometimes you need something when you get done with a fight. There's actually dedicated storage spaces in things like Humvees where you can remove the seat and there will be a little compartment inside, unless you're the truck commander, in which case that compartment holds the vehicle's batteries. And so yeah, underseat storage, critical. It's so handy to have when you can't go outside. It's got the auxiliary battery. It's got seats. It has everything you need, an internal fuel tank, which, if you look at it, where did it go? I just saw it a minute ago. Here it is. It's 11. It's center of the vehicle, which is smart, because if your fuel is here, it's not going to blow up. Like I told the story of the BMP-1s earlier in the video. This fuel tank would have been on the back, braced inside the door that troops needed to use to get into and out of the vehicle. That's not good for your health in the long term. So having a fuel tank in the middle, this is a whole raised platform back here, so you have to crawl down to get into the actual cockpit. But
it actually looks like you have to climb out and climb into the top hatch to get in, because that is a top hatch.
Yeah, I mean, you could go that way either.
Looks faster.
Yeah. No engine is shown in this cutaway. But it's because they are housed in the track sponsons on either side of the main hull, from where they provide power directly to the drive wheels.
Now, we actually did see that on the Chimera.
Yep.
Where it's right... No, not there. It's right here?
Where did the engine go?
Do they not have the engine?
Nope. They've got the fuel tank, and that's it. They just admitted it in this one. But, so, having two separate engines that drive the tracks individually, that's not unheard of. It's entirely possible that's a thing, which would, again, incentivize you to put a fuel tank in the middle so that it can distribute fuel to both sides of the vehicle equally.
Now, what if that fuel tank is struck? It's not going to burst into flames like a Hollywood movie, is it?
It depends on what you hit it with.
A tracer round will do it.
Some of them will. So tracer rounds, they are essentially on fire from the moment that they are shot.
I mean, have you seen her new skin? She's on fire.
Oh, my Lord. Did not just do that to me.
You're welcome.
But no,
I'm gonna die.
Tracer rounds are essentially like a low-grade incendiary ammunition. We actually have to be very considerate of the fact that they will catch wild trees and shrublands on fire if we fire them too much. But they are very useful for what they do. But because they are an incendiary round, they tend to not have an explosive component to them. So you are not going to have a high explosive tracer munition. In movies, you'll see tracers pop out every once in a while. That's because on a belt of ammunition, we would have like regular ammo, tracer. Regular ammo, tracer. And the tracers are just there to guide us back onto the target because you can't see every round that's being fired.
So a lad's weapon, you know, firing a laser, where you can see it visibly, like you can only see what was left of it, the light trail behind it because it already hit before you even know that it's shot. But you can actually aim off of that, can't you?
Yep, you would almost have to, in a way. And that's mainly what tracer rounds and everything are for, because when you're aiming down a weapon sight, unless it is like a scoped optic or something like that, where you're getting some magnification or extra detail, or it's something like the Salamander has where you have different like sensor outputs for your weapon, you're gonna need a way to essentially guess where to adjust next. Like experienced shooters intrinsically know through years and hours of practice. A tracer is easy mode. If I see that my tracers are hitting short of an enemy vehicle, I know that I have to raise up my fire a little bit in order to hit an enemy vehicle. If my tracers look like they are dropping behind an individual who's running away from me, I know that I can actually like predict ahead, correct my aim, and that's all without having to look down sights. Like tracers are insanely useful, especially at nighttime, because fighting with night vision like optics on is a pain.
Could you imagine what it would look like to see a lad's gun shot under night vision? You'd go blind.
You'd actually probably be perfectly fine. Most night vision goggles, at least in the modern military, they have functions for when you are flipped upside down, they'll turn off. It's a gyroscope that detects when it's not the right way up or it's being harshly shaken. So it'll just flip off. It mainly does that so you can rotate them up on top of your helmet, and then they just turn off so you're not wasting your batteries. And then there are versions that you can set a brightness filter on nowadays, where if a certain level of light starts coming into the computer that's processing the incoming light and projecting the display on the screen in front of you, and it will just shut off at a certain threshold. And that's so that you don't get blinded when a flare or a flashbang happens. Like, you'll be blinded a little bit, but it will not like scar your retinas or anything like that.
Okay, so there we go.
So yeah, there you go. Yeah, and we've got...
Oh, we also have the Monocular.
Yeah, the Monocular. It's a nice big Monocular. Yeah, binoculars, they're a thing. I love even on the Autocannon detail it says that there's a rangefinder built into the thing, because that's not something that a lot of people give detail to. But the ability to project a small laser out to your target, have it bounce back, computer tells you how many seconds that took, and then turns that into distance. That is phenomenally useful for something like the Salamander, which is going to be communicating with like an artillery element, or it's going to be filing reports. When you're sitting there looking at a giant map, I know where I am, I can guess where you are. But if I know exactly where I am, I know exactly what degree on a compass you are from me, and then I know the exact range, I can exactly pinpoint where you are and then call that position in to an artillery. Yep, because otherwise I have to do this whole fun thing where I call in the fire, I guess where the first round needs to hit, I wait for them to confirm, they fire, I see where it hits, and then I have to walk them onto the target.
Oh, that sounds like such a pain.
It is, and it's also really annoying because if your first guess is wrongfully off, you've now alerted them, they may be able to identify where you're spotting from, or, you know, you could, just in the worst case scenario, they get away.
Yeah.
It's not even the worst case if they find you and shoot at you. It's the worst case if they now know that they're compromised, they break down their camp, and they move somewhere else.
So that's what this thing would be used for.
Yeah.
Just spot and leave.
Yep, just find where the thing is, radio it back in. The autocannon is there for targets of opportunity and self-defense.
So, is that everything we want to say about this one?
Yeah.
Feasible tank?
Yeah, totally feasible.
All right.
Yeah. And also, just looks kind of cool.
It really does.
I'm a sucker for casements on heavy vehicles. Like, it makes me think of, like, little castles rolling around, and that's just always something that I've enjoyed.
So, This ought to be fun for you.
Scout platoons. Look at this.
All right, so let's take a look at this. We have the the company headquarters, the first squadron of 4 vehicles. Then underneath it, the second squadron of 4 vehicles. Then the third squadron is Sentinels.
Yep.
Now, I just hope the Sentinels can keep up with these things.
Yeah, that would be more of you are planning around them operating as elements unto themselves. So these 4 Sentinels will be put in a certain area where all the other vehicles, like the tracks, won't let them get there. Or they'll be used as a defensive measure and a rapid response unit, while these guys all break off and go out and conduct all their scout missions.
So this is just a scout company.
Yeah, this would be, I believe it even says, yeah, it's a reconnaissance company. So they are not here to fight. The first 2 squadrons will be there, and they'll probably break off individual units to work as auxiliaries with other units. The Sentinels themselves are probably going to get called on whenever they find an area that's just too rough for anyone else to get through. It's like, hey, we need recon in this location, but we can't get there because there's a river that's too deep, or there's a drop or a gorge that we can't cross, but Sentinel can.
Yeah, like a fallen rock zone or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So again, we guessed it pretty much correctly that they are just being used for scout elements.
Yeah. I love the idea of privates being in charge of Sentinels, though. That's just...
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Isn't the basic run?
The standard military private is the lowest on the totem pole in terms of rank. So the fact that you put a private in charge of something as complex as a self-powered locomotion unit, yeah, it's kind of hilarious.
I mean, they are ridiculously uncomfortable, and guardsmen hate them.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's a private. Anyone who's ever met an army private who was left unsupervised knows that they can just destroy anything.
So that's like giving the keys to a toddler.
It really does feel like that sometimes. I don't know how many times I got a phone call saying it's like, hey, Private so-and-so has done this thing, and we need you to fix it.
This thing can overcharge its engines and go even further.
Yeah.
That actually makes sense, though.
That does, yeah. Which, again, that's what you would want in a scout vehicle. It could get somewhere fast, it could get out of there fast. It doesn't have to be there for a long time, just a good time.
And again, camo netting to help it hull down. Let's see, hunter killer missiles, improved comms, minesweepers, rough terrain modifications. So that'd be the dozer, which for them that's rough terrain modification. Just push that shit. Push it out of the way. Track guards, which we're at the point where we assume that from here up is going to be track guarded.
Yeah.
Just because otherwise these vehicles are just asinine.
It's way too easy to disable a vehicle if you have access to its track at your eye level.
Pencil-mounted weapons, track guards, which obviously searchlights. Would you want searchlights on this thing?
Searchlights are one of those things where it's never going to hurt you to have it.
All right, fair enough. And smoke launchers, because if this thing needs to get away, drop smoke and leave.
Yep.
So then you have the command version of it, which I don't really think we need to go over that.
No, I'm willing to bet that it's going to be pretty much closer range and more communications equipment.
Yep. It's not as fast, which is kind of its biggest weakness.
Yeah.
I would rather take a Chimera, to be honest.
It's still real quick. But it is essentially the same size as a Chimera. It's a little shorter, so there's like an argument to be made for it. But yeah, I would. If you have the option, take the Chimera. If only because this is something I didn't mention before. The reason why open top is fine on a fast vehicle is if somebody fires an artillery shell in your direction and it is a timed or a barometric fuse, it could detonate above your vehicle. Shrapnel is not fun. Let's say that again, kids. Shrapnel is not a fun time for anyone involved.
Yeah, because then you have to, go into a cave and, build a reactor, an arc reactor, put it into your chest, become Iron Man for a few years.
Yeah, and that's only if...
And then you die.
That's only if you're a super intelligent drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, no, shrapnel is like super devastating, and the fact that all of the components and everything are open in this vehicle, even if it's just your radio, a piece of shrapnel can ruin a radio's day. And then suddenly, as far as the world outside is concerned, you no longer exist. Like, their last contact with you was however many hours ago you contacted them. The piece of shrapnel takes out your radio.
You're dead.
They may just fire on your position because they think you got overrun.
Yep.
And like,
Now, again, if it's a command vehicle, on the other hand, with a wow, I cannot remember the name of the Chimera for a second, but with a Chimera, it makes more sense to just send out the scout variant of this thing with its better comms to just contact you, so you can go up ahead to the other scout vehicles and eventually get it down the line to your artillery.
Yep, and despite what people think, satellites, even in the modern day, are not the primary form of communication. Most of them are line-of-sight radios. So you will actually set up vehicles, similar to like the Salamander, as radio relays, and they will essentially just be set up to where a message will come in, and you can route that message through to other members of the unit further on down the line. Eventually, it'll get all the way back to headquarters.
So these scout salamanders, they're actually like a perfect vehicle for the Imperial Guard.
Yeah, they get into position real quick. They can radio in fire coordinates to Basilisks or to Manticores.
So they do what the Land Speeder does for the Space Marines.
Yeah, without having to be like super reliant on magical anti-grav technology.
Yeah, which we're going to get to because that's a whole mess.
Yay!
And then we have, but they put a fuel drum in front of it.
I mean, if it's an empty drum, who knows? But it's not unheard of to just randomly throw things on any part of a vehicle that will carry it. Like, if we're being totally honest, if the piece of equipment has to get somewhere, you're gonna just throw it somewhere.
Yep, and it's pulling a Basilisk, it's actually pulling one of the artillery pieces.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit silly for a scout vehicle to be doing. But it is strong enough to do it, so why not?
I mean, you can carry the modern 155 howitzer with just a standard Humvee. Like, they are, like, big artillery guns are not usually super heavy because it's the barrel, the gun, and that's about it.
And now we're moving on to the Trojan. Now, everybody, remember, bring a Trojan. Anywho.
Everyone, always stay safe. You never know when you're going to need one, but you're going to wish you had one.
Yes.
You know, for when you need to repair your tanks, clearly.
Obviously, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, what were you talking about?
Anyway. So the Trojan is the workhorse used by the Imperial Guard armor regiments as a tractor or towing weapon. Now, this is where a lot of people get that whole "it's a tractor" thing from. It is not. It is not a tractor engine at all in any way, shape, or form. It is not a tractor. I have looked for every single source that said that the engines used in these vehicles were tractors. All of them are lies. All of them are from Reddit. All of them are from 40k YouTuber lore channels that never cite their sources. I have the source. I've read all of them. No. It is used as a tractor, not used with a tractor engine. I'm done with that rant.
Should we move on then? Just in case of.
So, things to be said about the Trojan. It's it's a tow truck.
Yeah, it is a tow truck, repair vehicle, supply vehicle. Just take the gun off the top. And again, this is one of those things where, like, if stat-wise, we'll see that
You could do 80.
Yeah, if the Chimera is accurate, this thing is accurate because you take a lot of the armor off. It doesn't have a main armament other than the heavy bolter that's mounted on the front, and that is 100% just covering fire, suppressing fire madness. But the silhouette of this thing is almost identical to the M113, which was an armored personnel carrier used by the U.S. military for, like 30, 40 years before it was replaced by the Bradley. And that thing was essentially modified to do any job you needed it to do. And so that's exactly what you see here. Yeah, totally feasible tank, like having a little crane and winch winch, not wench. It doesn't serve you ale, it pulls you out of bogs. Like having something like that, immensely valuable because nobody wants to manhandle a tank out of a ditch.
Now, I've also seen variants of this thing where people put folding bridges on top of them.
Yeah, standard engineer tanks nowadays actually have very similar functions. They have no main armament, but they will have like a collapsible bridge. They'll have a pontoon bridge like strapped down to the top just for river crossings and whatnot. Which, strangely enough, we know from the Imperial Guard Codex that the Chimera is amphibious. But it hasn't been mentioned yet in the Forge World book.
No, not yet.
Yeah. But, yes, amphibious tanks are a thing.
Do they float?
Yes, quite a bit, actually.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
What?
The LATV-4, I remember its colloquial name. It's called the Alligator.
Hold up. So my white girl brain listened to that and said latte tank.
Nope, not the latte.
I'm sorry.
The Lat-V.
So I know it's something special you get at Starbucks.
Yeah, it's on the secret menu.
Yeah.
It's right there at the purple drink.
Purple drink.
I'm not even kidding. Purple drink's a thing. Go to your local Starbucks, ask for purple drink or pink drink. You'll be surprised. But yeah, like there are amphibious like armored personnel carriers. They were used by the Marines in the island hopping campaigns of World War II. They were known as the Alligator in the Pacific Theater. In the Western Theater, we called them the Buffalo, and they were used to cross like the river valleys and whatnot that you would end up inevitably running into, where they were north-south rivers that, we could walk a few hundred miles that way, or we can just go across. Yeah, and it's surprisingly easy to make an amphibious tank. It just needs to be like a little bit lighter armored than you would probably want, but because of how buoyancy works, pretty easy to make something float, especially if it's like void capable in the back compartment like a Chimera is.
Yep. So, well, environmentally sealed. Sorry, void capable is the wrong word.
Yes.
I mean, it's the same exact thing.
It would be, yeah.
So, tank feasible. It's useful.
It works, yeah.
The Atlas recovery vehicle is the one that we went over before.
Yep, this one is for towing the bigger vehicles, not for just resupplying everything.
Which is funny because in its picture it's towing a Lehman Russ.
Yep.
Let's see. Towing vehicle. you can tow the.
Yep, for the Earthshaker, Hydra, or Manticore platforms.
Yep, and there's the amphibious rule.
There we go. Now we've come to it.
It is in its rules. Okay, and let's see. Anything else? It's just a towing vehicle
And amphibious. This was before it actually had
Trojan
rules
is
for
a troop
fixing
choice for an Imperial Guard army. This thing's a troop choice.
For 45 points, I believe it.
Yo, that's a good troop choice.
That's a very budget friendly.
I would take this thing now.
Yeah.
I gotta check if it's still. No, I don't think it's a thing anymore.
They don't have it in production anymore. I know. I've been looking for one for my industrial table.
Okay, so we're not gonna talk about the Cyclops. We do know that they existed.
And in the real world, they exist.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a little drone that you just drive under a tank and explode it.
Yep. Little tiny like baby tank with tons of C4 in it.
Baby tank, do, boom.
Yeah.
Cyclops, we're still going over there. We're not going to go through the Sentinels. We're not going to go.
Basilisk.
We are going to go to the Basilisk. So, I think we need to read this one.
Yeah. So the Basilisk is the standard Imperial Guard artillery piece. It is a self-propelled field gun designed to provide medium to long-range artillery support to units on the front line. Utilizing the versatile and rugged Chimera chassis to mount an Earthshaker cannon, the Basilisk is the mainstay of Imperial Guard artillery regiments. Although within a regiment, it is likely to be mixed with other types of artillery, such as Manticore missile launchers, Griffin heavy mortar carriers, or even huge bombard siege artillery pieces. All these other weapons have their place, but the Basilisk is by far the most common and called upon most often to fire long barrages. The Basilisk retains all the basic features of the Chimera, such as engines, suspension, etc., but replaces the rear passenger compartment with an open-topped firing platform protected to the front by an armored gun shield. Inside the Basilisk, there is a space for a driver and commander, who also mans the vehicle's heavy bolter for self-defense. There you go.
Hey, they actually said it.
Yeah. The gun crew, comprising of a gunner and a loader, fight from the rear platform. The loader works to heave heavy shells into the gun's breech, whilst the gunner follows the commander's instructions to aim and fire the Earthshaker.
That seems like they need an auto-loader.
Yeah, because I just looked a little further ahead, and this is where that gets hard. The Basilisk's main task is to fire artillery barrages to support frontline units. They are directed by the company's forward artillery observers, or by other high-ranking Imperial Guard officers, who are trained to direct artillery. Most missions use high explosive rounds, but other more specialized rounds are often issued to Basilisks, such as smoke, incendiary shells, and illumination shells for lighting up a battlefield at night. The Earthshaker is a 132mm caliber weapon capable of firing a shell over 15 kilometers at a velocity of 814 meters per second.
Why does that seem really low?
That isn't really low. Essentially, the biggest gun that we use in the U.S. Army's arsenal, as far as artillery pieces go, is a 155 howitzer. And that thing is utterly devastating and destructive, and it can just throw shells across cities. And it's used to great effect. It's really great for removing a mountaintop when, you don't want to wait.
It's blocking your view.
Pretty much. The issue that comes in is there's only 2 guys riding on the back of this sucker, and that shell is not light. 132mm caliber shell, like we're talking about, it has the munition, the cases, like all the powder and everything you need all in one piece, because I built the Basilisk, I know that that's what they come in. One guy lifting and moving those around, he's only going to get a few shots off before he's entirely smoked. Personally, you'd probably want to see like one additional guy help with the loading duties.
I do have to bring in one thing really quickly. Bionics.
Bionics would actually be great, and it's actually something we've researched in the modern military, is having a powered lift assists exoskeleton for the express use of transporting artillery shells.
Yeah, so there we go. That
Yeah.
can solve that issue.
Easily, and research on that is still ongoing, but
And we know
it is
that
a thing we're looking into.
Now, in the fluff, we do know that the Imperial Guard is paid through thrones, geld, and crowns, depending on its sector. There's Imperial credits. There's a ton of different Imperial currencies that are all accepted. We also know that if a guardsman has served and wishes to continue to serve or get dishonorably discharged, shot in the back of the head, and wishes to leave the service, depending, if they're an officer, they actually can, but if they're a private, they can actually use their funds for that war in order to pay for a bionic. And a tech priest will come out, a tech priest of the biologist will come out, assess his arm, take it off if it is damaged, and replace it with a bionic that can go all the way into the lower chest, seen in Strachan. That's his name. It can be used to replace hearts, lungs, internal organs of all of them, your legs, your actual head cavity, in some cases, part of your brain. So a good way of getting around this problem of only having 2 men is by taking the officers who have been injured, the privates who have been injured, and issuing them to the Basilisk companies and just having them with their augmetics and being stronger than the average human, being able to lift and put those rounds in at a much more efficient rate.
Yep, that would totally work, because currently gun crews can range anywhere from, I want to say it's 4 to 8 individuals at any given time, and usually there's one commander who actually controls the firing mechanism. Modern day, there's still lanyard pull systems, so you actually manually pull a rope to fire the weapon.
That is hilarious. It's like firing a catapult.
Yeah, it's a very weird motion you have to do as well.
It's like firing a Beyblade.
Yeah, it kind of is, but you're kind of a giant, like, you're kind of a central focus. You essentially, I'm going to try and indicate this as much as possible. So imagine that this man is pulling the lanyard for that Basilisk. He has to twist his entire body to pull that thing.
Oh, so it's like starting a lawnmower.
Kind of, except your entire body is going into it.
So just like starting a lawnmower.
We really need to get you into a gym.
Look, I'm not that strong.
But yeah, no, like 15 kilometers, that's about 9 miles, 10 miles. So that is entirely comparable to like modern day long range artillery. So yeah, if anyone ever wants to get really paranoid, Google a place that's 10 miles away from where you live and then realize you have like maybe 30 seconds, depending on like the speed of the munition, from when it fires to when it would impact the home where you live. So yeah, it gets real sobering real quick.
It's just, wow.
Yeah.
Especially if you live within a military...
Yeah, if you live next to a military base, yeah.
Oh, sorry, we misfired and accidentally took out Timmy's house.
Yeah, anyone who lives next to a military base, on Wednesdays you will hear the great voice in the sky. That is your local nuclear or artillery strike warning. Those are there to make you feel safe. Because if one of those things is happening, you're not safe.
No, you're gone. All right, let's get the last paragraph.
Sure. Such is the power of the Earthshaker cannon that shells are easily capable of destroying enemy vehicles, strong points, or buildings. Basilisks are often required to add their firepower in direct support of combat troops. The Earthshaker's low angle of elevation means it can be fielded as an assault gun, engaging targets at short range with devastating effect. It is not seen as a replacement for a battle tank. Its lack of armor and open-top platform make it too vulnerable to enemy fire to lead assaults. Instead, it is fielded in a support role. A vehicle which is to fight as an assault gun will be detached from its parent artillery company and temporarily placed under the command of the tank company or armored fist company HQ it is to support. Yeah.
Seems right.
Yeah, detachments are a thing. Like, you may get told that, hey, for this mission or this deployment, you're not going to be with the rest of us. You're going to go help out, Captain What's-His-Nuts over at the 5-0 Worst.
Also, I just want to point this out real quick. This picture shows us how they reload the Manicore.
Yep.
They literally use the Sentinel powerlifter to reload it.
I mean, yeah, I'm not, like we said, I'm not lifting one of those missiles. I cannot be trusted.
Yeah. So there's that. Okay, so let's take a look at the stats for the Basilisk. I don't like how they keep the rounds out here. I mean, it makes sense.
You'd have to, just because you can see where the door for the breach is.
Yeah.
So you put anywhere under there, you're risking it getting in the way of the gun when it angles in a certain direction. Like, it could just go real bad for you.
That's fair.
Yeah, leave it out on the back end.
So, going over this vehicle, I didn't write up the stats for it because I am dumb and completely forgot to do this one. It looks like its length is 7.8, which is very similar to the other vehicle.
Yep, it's a little bit longer, but that's because it has this big old back platform that everyone's sitting on. It's a little bit shorter, it's a little bit narrower, if I remember. Yeah, it's a little bit narrower than the Chimeras are. And for height, it is taller because, look at the big old gun stuck on top.
Now, in this case, this wouldn't really matter because this tank is sitting so far away.
Yeah, when you're talking about artillery guns and whatnot, the entire length of the weapon itself is usually angled very high off the ground. And when an artillery piece fires, there's actually a cone of pressure that is potentially damaging to humans.
Which these guys are going to be exposed to.
Oh no, it's everything in front.
Oh, okay.
There's a giant angle coming off the front of any of these guns where if an individual is in that and within a certain distance, essentially the pericardial sac around your heart, it can tear and you can have a heart attack and die from it. And I've seen it happen, and it's...
So if this gun is being surrounded by infantry, it should just fire.
You just fire it. Yeah, the sheer concussive force of one of these rounds going off could force heart attacks on people. It is utter insanity, and that's if you don't go deaf, from the sheer sound of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's size-wise, it's a Chimera, but with extra bits added on. But artillery guns are really heavy. And this is something that cannot be understated. You are containing a massive explosion.
40 tons.
Yep.
Compared to the Chimera's...
38.
So that artillery gun isn't that heavy? Which is weird to say.
Yeah, the artillery gun adds an extra 2 tons to the vehicle after you take out the turret and the troop transport areas.
Yeah, that's fair.
So it probably weighs a few tons just on its own. You're just stripping out a lot of things because
Actually,
there's
we
lots of
can look
negative
up
space.
how much that it weighs on its own because we can just look up the
Oh yeah, we can look up the carriage.
actual turret,
Where are you?
which is of course going to be like back here or something. I thought we passed it. Am I just dumb?
Not today.
Oh yeah, we also have to go over the vehicle structure. Though we did that in the Lehman
We
Russ
did that in the
video.
Lehman Russ. If it works for a tank, it works for an infantry fighting vehicle.
Fair enough.
This should not surprise anyone since they're just baby tanks.
Do 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 do
Baby tank.
do 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 do
YouTube strike.
do 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 do. Okay, so it's got to be in the weapon platform. We did
gotta
find out
be.
that these came out of Germany towards the end of World War II.
Yes, but they weren't dropped out
There
of
it is.
planes. All right, here we go. We're getting to it.
There's the flak.
Almost there. Keep going. There we go.
So its weight is 21 tons.
So yeah, 21 tons with the carriage and everything underneath. So I think it's safe to say that the gun itself probably weighs anywhere from 8 to 10 tons on its own.
All right, so there we go.
So yeah, so it's big, it's heavy. It's going to recoil the entire vehicle around it, and that happens. Like self-propelled artillery guns are a thing.
Now, what about this style tank? Would it flip over from firing that thing?
No, mainly because you would essentially brace it. There are mechanisms built into the cannons in order to keep them from doing that. I would assume an engineer has actually looked at it. And also, this whole setup over here that we see with the Armageddon and Hades patterns for the Basilisk with the enclosed turret casings, that looks shockingly similar to something like the Paladin, which is the U.S. military's current version of a self-propelled gun. They have so many ways of making sure this thing does not flip because they are planning around it always being flat. They are always going to brace the gun itself. Matter of fact, there are versions of self-propelled artillery guns out in the world right now that essentially have the big old legs that kick out and brace the gun to the rear of the vehicle. Similar to what you see with just a standard artillery piece. So, yeah.
There we go.
They know the guns are real big. They know that you will not be moving when you fire them. So they plan around that. Moving and firing one of these things is a bad idea.
So this thing's completely feasible.
It's completely feasible. There's not much that you can complain about when it's just big old gun on some sort of armored transport.
It is a lot slower than the Chimera,
Yeah,
but it's also a lot heavier than the Chimera.
it's a lot heavier. Now that we know that the engines are all essentially the same across all these patterns because they are driving the individual treads, because it's fast, because it is so much bigger, it's so much more top heavy and everything, it's going to slow this thing down.
Mm-hmm. So this is probably equivalent to the Trojan's recovery speed when it's towing another vehicle.
Probably. It would make sense. But
Now,
yeah.
what about the elevation of the gun? Is that out of the question?
So 0 would mean that it fires flat across the horizon up to, 59? Yeah, 59 degrees. That's totally within the realm of possibility. Anything that fires over 60 degrees in elevation, those are typically considered mortars. Howitzers fire anywhere from under 60 to flat across the horizon. Cannons fire from, I want to say it's around 25 to 30 down to the horizon. So that's the difference between a mortar, a cannon, and a howitzer. It's just what angle they fire from.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it makes it really pretty basic. So yeah, that's totally reasonable. And because you are firing at just such colossal distances, there's no reason to assume that up to 59 is unfeasible or that down flat across the horizon is either, because it did say that sometimes they are used as direct fire weapons, and that's been a thing done in history for since gunpowder really became a thing.
Isn't it essentially a tank destroyer at that point?
Essentially, yeah, or a bunker buster if you lack some sort of air support. It's something you want to put a big heavy round through.
Now this thing only having 20 rounds.
Yep.
That's accurate?
That's totally accurate. Matter of fact, and you can find footage of this online where you see an artillery gun being used, you will actually stage all the ammunition out of the crates near the gun, but never like right next to. Like this is pretty close, but considering this is a self-propelled gun, you're working with limited space, so that's fine. Usually you'd have your artillery piece here. You have the sergeant in charge who is actually holding the lanyard, so he gets to fire the big old thing. You have your loader crew. You have your actual gunners, which they're the ones who control everything.
By the way.
Yeah, it's a great lanyard. You can't take it with you. No one ever lets you take it. It's always upset me.
How are you supposed to hold your keys?
Well,
anyway.
I have stuff for that, but we're not going into that on this video. And then like you'd store all of your ammunition off to one side. And usually you're only going to store about as much ammunition as you would need to complete 2 to 3 fire missions. Because the more ammunition you store in one place, the higher risk you put everyone in case counter battery fire occurs. And that's just where somebody using really just math analyzes where your rounds are hitting, the angle that they're hitting from, and then figures out where you are.
So I want to check something really quickly. Now, a second ago, we saw the power lifter. Now, we know that this is essentially the utility vehicle of reloading and everything.
Yeah.
This thing can go 45 kph, which is standard for the Sentinel.
Mm-hmm.
So this thing is going to be running with entire handfuls of ammunition, like, obviously in its pallets and everything.
Yeah, probably just in a palletized form, but yeah, it's going to have to, and that's why you see this giant counterweight out the back of it.
Mm-hmm. Now, the interesting thing about the Sentinel, now this isn't a video about the Sentinel, obviously, but since we're talking about artillery and the Trojan and things of that nature, they're going to be running in as quickly as possible with the munitions. This thing's going to be running next to it. Mm-hmm. This thing's going to take itself out, and then this thing's going to grab it, run it all the way up to those men, put it there as a pallet of 20, and then they're just going to tear it open and keep reloading and firing if needed, once it relocates.
Yeah.
And is that accurate to modern-day military?
Oh, yeah. Usually what you'll end up having is you'll have a vehicle, like if you're in a mobile artillery unit, there'll usually be a vehicle that holds a lot of the ammunition nearby the gun battery. If you are in an entrenched position, you'll actually have a bunker that's set aside just for the ammunition, and there will be runners going over, loading up vehicles with pallets of these things. They will bring those over to the guns themselves. Members of the gun team will run over to that pallet location. They'll get dealt their ammunition out by the officer in charge. And mainly it's just a lot of command and control to make sure that they get the right types of ammunition at the right place to the right gun, because the last thing you want is the fire team the battery firing the wrong type of ammunition during a fire mission because they don't have access to the right type of ammunition.
So if you were on deployment and you had a Sentinel to help you,
oh, that'd be phenomenal. Any sort of like extra helping carrying things simplifies all the work. It's less men that I have to rotate off guard duties, off of combat duties. It increases the speed and efficiency of the entire process, and it makes it safer for everyone. Because if I only have to keep 10 to 15 rounds next to a gun, because I can store the rest in a bunker and reliably bring it back and forth.
And as we said before, a bunker can be deployed from orbit using a Valkyrie to drop it, which is the craziest thing ever. If it can carry a Baneblade, it can carry a bunker, it just drops it with all of its munitions and everything.
Yeah.
We see this in the Dawn of War 2 game, as well as seeing it in some of the orbital deployments of the Elysians. Mm-hmm. Elysians love using orbital dropped things via Valkyrie drop.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I'm saying orbital, and sorry, I
No, you're
cut
good.
you off, is because the ships in space, the Valkyrie is equipped with all of its equipment. It goes at over 1,200 miles per hour, flies it down to the planet as quickly as possible, it drops it, and then it leaves. It heads back up, or it heads to an airfield. Mm-hmm. So, again, I can't help but think, but the Militarum is efficient.
Yeah, logistics is the boring thing about warfare, but it is the thing that makes warfare work. And if your logistics are good and you can simplify how stuff gets to the battlefield, how it's stored on the battlefield, how it's utilized, life just gets easier.
Now, this will be boiled down to, in 40K, and I don't know if this is true in real life, the current commander general who is in charge of the entire event, such as like Creed, Lord Castellan Creed. So it would fall to a Lord Castellan of a battlefield, and he would be the one in charge of that. Once he made all the proper paperwork and everything to the administratum and everything, that's where the nightmare starts coming in.
So, in the modern military, generals don't really discuss logistics and dictate policy when it comes to those things, but that's only because we as modern fighting forces, we insulate ourselves from tasks we're not good at. So there is an actual section of your command detachment that will be in charge of requisitioning supplies. There will be a section of that that's in charge of hazmat supplies, a section of that that's in charge for ammo, a section of that that's in charge for fuel. Like, there will be all sorts of extra little people who know where everything is going to go and where everything is going to be kept. Like, commanders and generals, they tend to have a good overview of what everything will look like, but they are not the ones dictating. It's like, oh, I want the food from here, I want this from there, I want that from there. There's a whole departments of officers who...
Minotaurum.
Well, in the real world, it's actual just other officers. It's usually like the S4 and the S8 and things like that. It's individuals who, they are not working as frontline combat officers. They're what we call staff officers. And their entire job is to just make the mission possible for the rest of the unit. They are not going to be going out on recons. They're not going to be doing the fighting. But they're there to learn how warfare works behind the scenes. And they usually learn that from their executive officers, who they're in charge of the background operations of the unit, so that the commander can focus on big picture things. So yeah, it's more of just the commander doesn't have to think about it, and so he doesn't. But he's able to do that because they put people in the right positions. Or, in the case of the US Army, they put any random person in the position and they just sink or swim. Oh yeah.
So, Basilisk, completely feasible.
Basilisk totally feasible. Like, I'd love to see the recoil system on this thing, but if you've got bionics to load it, no reason that wouldn't function just fine. And I think we're going to see that pan out for all the other big guns too.
I have a feeling about that as well. So, Basilisk 100 points, 12 armor, 10/10, ballistic skill 3+, so hitting on 4s, large blast template weapon, and then we have the Griffin, which is essentially a smaller version of it.
Yep, it just carries a mortar instead of the Earthshaker cannon.
Yep. So now we get the Medusa Siege gun, which is, you know, not as gifted as its brethren.
No, but you know what? Sometimes
Size doesn't matter.
It's all about how you use it. And considering that the whole thing behind the Medusa is that it's meant for being brought up to the front and firing on heavily like entrenched and reinforced positions, and we've seen this ammunition before. That's the same style of ammunition that you see fired off of the Baneblade main cannon, the rocket-assisted round. So, yeah, it's a big, bulky thing that's just going to fire off and ruin somebody's day.
Now, this is what I was talking about before. Do you see how the ammunition is kept down here?
Yep.
It's right behind this hatch.
Yeah, that has to be a place where you can store that thing. I have no idea how you're fitting 18 rounds of that.
Good luck.
Tetris is a thing.
At best, you're fitting 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, there is another vehicle behind you that carries your ammunition if you're a gun this big.
Yep.
Like, that is...
And again, there's a power lifter right there just sitting there going like this, hey, do you need help?
Yep, and underseat storage for all your snacks as to be expected.
Yep, which is good. That's important.
Which is good. That is critical.
Now, this thing only has a 40-degree elevation.
Which would make sense considering the size of the projectile in question. There is a lot of math involved in artillery, and the math essentially comes down to how fast can you get the projectile moving and how heavy is it. And that will determine its ballistic curve. Because unlike what some people say, bullets do not go straight. They are affected by gravity and the laws of physics, which means they'll go up, they'll slow down, they'll start coming back down, and they'll start speeding back up again.
Yeah.
That's why muzzle velocity is something that we measure when we're talking about modern firearms, because the muzzle velocity gives you that starting number. And
Yep.
then you can figure everything else out because physics is predictable.
And it's kind of like, and you can see this in all sorts of like video games and sci-fi stuff. Like you see it in Overwatch, some of the rounds will fall after a bit.
Yep.
You'll see it in like CSGO, they'll fall just a little bit because it's more closer range.
Yeah.
In 40K, you see a bolt around just shoot perfectly straight and then falls immediately at 2 feet.
Yep.
Just completely loses all momentum. and
Just
falls.
it gets tired, okay?
That's obviously a joke on measuring distance and everything.
Yeah, but considering we look at like all of these big rounds, the flatter a trajectory is, the bigger the round can possibly be. The higher up you try to fire that round, you're actually shortening the ballistic curve. So you go from a nice big like semicircle like this, and as you aim higher up, this has to move in closer.
Okay,
So
that makes
40
sense.
is around where you're going to be at your max possible range, because if you aim lower than 40, you're going to just essentially start burying the round a little bit earlier. Because again, it's traveling closer to the ground, there's more air resistance at the ground. So yeah, like that's totally fine. Like, and because it is a siege guns are something that we saw get used a lot more prior to World War II. Back in the heydays where things like giant entrenched positions were a thing you had to contend with.
Which, if you're fighting orcs, that is a thing.
Yeah, you can fire just one of these things at a mob of boys and probably do some pretty good stuff, but also, like, a rock is going to land and never move again. So Medusa would be great for fighting that. But yeah.
Everything else, this tank is kind of obsolete.
Yeah, in the world of 40K, this is not being used for defensive actions. It's not being used for pacification operations. This would only get rolled out for a siege operation that you knew was going to be super long and prolonged. And even then, it's only really going to get used to crack open a fortification. This is not like a bombardment style weapon. If you're going to bombard somebody in a siege, you want to outrange them. You don't want to outshoot them.
Makes sense.
Yeah, like attrition warfare. Don't lose as many of your guys as they lose theirs, and then you win. But yeah, other
It's a
than that,
neat looking gun.
It's super neat looking, and again, option for a casement. Just so
Makes
great.
it look better.
It does make it look better. Also, it just protects everything else.
Then we actually see it firing, which is kind of cool.
Yep. Look at those Deathcore Krieg boys.
That's not the Death Corps.
Are they not?
No, that's Cadians.
Oh, curses! Curse you, Glare.
Haha, foiled again.
Foiled again by Glare.
All right, now we get up to the Hydra Flak tank, the anti-tank, anti-aircraft, one of the first anti-aircraft vehicles in 40K.
Yeah, one of, like the original to my mind. Before we started getting the Space Marine versions, like a few years ago.
Yeah,
and
that was 7th edition that they came. No, 8th. Yeah, 7th.
yes, end of 7th, start of 8th, because there was a formation you could take, so it had to be 7th.
Yeah. Maybe late 6th into 7th.
Maybe. If you know, let us know. But yeah, anti-aircraft tanks, 100% a thing. And because we know that it is the Chimera's chassis and they just essentially throw this giant mechanized monstrosity onto the back, you can actually look in history and see that that's something that's done very often to make anti-aircraft tanks.
Now, granted, I would not want to be this close to the front line.
Yeah, but that's kind of the thing. Because of how flak works, so anyone who's ever seen a World War II movie has seen that little puff of black smoke in front of an aircraft. And everyone's like, oh, there's flak ahead. Flak just means that it's a high explosive round exploding at a predetermined height. And they do that by using a timer. And so there will be a little feed mechanism in here that will click the timer to a certain point in order for the shell to fire out. And then when the shell hits that timer, it will detonate. That is what creates that little puff of black smoke. And what that does is it throws shrapnel everywhere.
Isn't it also, it like superheats the air as well, so it makes the air turbulent?
Yeah, kind of as like a side effect. You'll get like rising air, which will buffet wings and whatnot. You're not going to down a plane through turbulence. If you were going to down a plane through turbulence, it means that they would not be able to fly on like sunny days. Like
Okay.
that's a terribly designed aircraft at that point. Like, yeah, turbulence alone is never the like leading cause of a plane going down. There's always extra things, but like rising air currents, that's not what downs a plane. Matter of fact, it makes it harder for them to land.
That's fair.
As a former paratrooper, you know, like heat rising from the ground keeps you stuck in the air a long time. It's real annoying. But yeah, like throwing a bunch of like linked, like essentially just autocannons, like we've been talking about, onto a system that has a rangefinder that can fire at certain locations like pretty rapidly because it does rotate around with the 360 turret mechanism. Yeah, there's no reason not to have it. You have a little umbrella of anti-aircraft fire following up with all of your tanks, and that's kind of where you want it. Do you want it to be at the very front? No. But behind a little grove of trees sitting in a clearing, providing like fire support to all the units around it, yeah, that'd be perfect. So you'd probably put one of these, essentially you'd have your main line of Chimeras, like a battery that for AA fire, Hydra flak tank, and then your Basilisk behind that. So anything that wants to get to the Basilisks, it's going to be reported by your Salamanders and your Chimeras. The Hydra is going to be able to intercept it long before it gets to your artillery piece.
Which by the time it's getting back there, you can have your own aircraft into the air.
Yep, exactly. It's all like anti-aircraft tactics are all about forewarning. If you don't know that they're coming, you can't react to them.
That's fair.
But yeah, like, and that's pretty straightforward. And
I love the cannons, though. This tank has always been one of my favorite tanks in 40k.
yeah, the long barrel autocannons always look really cool.
And there we see it in a tank company with a Baneblade just popping out of a freaking building, because why not?
Yeah, I mean, you know, your convoys have to have air support too, and you can't always have your like nice big A-10 Warthogs flying next to you. So having somebody that can like engage another like aircraft is huge. Especially since canonically we know that there's issues with radar on a lot of different Forge Worlds and stuff like that. It makes sense just to have one nearby.
Yep. And this one does actually have a comms operator.
Yep.
Like a designated comms operator.
Yeah, his whole job will just be to make sure that everything works, while the gunner or commander, because in 40k the commander for some reason is the one up in the cupola the entire time. But they would all be like in here working with it. This little flat section here would actually be like a rangefinder or line of sight radar return device. So there's an actual reason for stuff like that being shown. Because in the modern day, flat guns are actually run off of computers. You used to actually have to manually set the time that you wanted the rounds to take before it detonated.
God, I hope 3 seconds is enough.
Yeah, pretty much that you had to guess. It's like, man, he could either be a kilometer away or 3 kilometers away. I'm not entirely sure. I'm gonna just split the difference, say 2, and see what happens. And then you'd fire your round, and then you'd see it explode, and it explodes behind the vehicle. It's like, okay, bring the timer down for the next round. And there were actually cool mechanisms that people could set up where essentially as rounds were fed into the guns, their dials for their timers would get manually spun to set positions before they were loaded. So now, modern era, so dark age of technology that we live in, you can actually have like a laser rangefinder ping off an aircraft, tell you exactly how far it is, and it can like manually set those timers for you. So that's what we're looking at here when we look at the Hydra and everything. And like as far as like internal views, I don't think they gave us one for that. They did not, sadly.
Well, that's a shame.
That is a shame, but that is a feature that I would expect to see on something like this, and it would make sense why you would have this like flat surface just sitting here for no good reason. But yeah, like it is a Hydra. It has a lot of big guns. It is a little bit slower than a Chimera, but it doesn't have to be as fast as them.
So 0 to 79, so this thing can point almost straight out.
Yeah, almost straight up, which is what you want. Essentially, this gun would track up, and then
start spinning.
And then start rotating towards, and then follow an enemy aircraft down.
Okay.
If it's working in a battery, odds are that they would just have multiples, and they would be designated like different sectors of fire. So tanks 1 to 3 would fire here in the sky. Tanks 4 to 6 would fire here in the sky, and you only fire in that sector. But that's just because flak works best when there's a lot of it.
600 rounds. That's not a lot of it.
It's not a lot, especially when you consider it's firing 4 at a time.
Yeah.
So you are going to burn through ammunition really quickly, but because you are an anti-air unit, your like level of engagement is seconds at best. You have like maybe 3 to 4 seconds, depending on the speed of the enemy aircraft and the range of your guns, during which you can fire. Because you have to think about AA as that umbrella that I was talking about. That aircraft intersects the umbrella here, it's in the umbrella, it's out of the umbrella.
So you're only hitting it at 2 points.
You have the short little distance of the entire time you could see it to fire. So 600 rounds may not seem like a lot, but if you're getting good resupply, a Hydra doesn't need a lot of rounds carried on itself. It's only going to be firing them in like bursts at any one time. Like,
and of course, they're going to be resupplied if needed.
yeah, and if they're staying in an entrenched position, like we're looking at the Hydra platforms at that point, they're going to have that same thing that the Earthshaker cannons do, where they're going to have a resupply train nearby, ready to move at a moment's notice to keep up a prolonged barrage of anti-aircraft fire. But yeah, no, it's fine. Like, there's no real issue with it. I am curious why the heavy bolter secondary for this only has 300 rounds as opposed to the standard 400 in the Chimera.
Maybe a typo?
Maybe a typo, maybe there's a reason that they just never thought of putting in the book, because we don't have the cross-section for this one, sadly.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, but it's more of the same. It is a Chimera, like, and the Chimera just happens to work in this role because you slapped a different type of turret on it.
So, Chimera, effective tank.
Chimera's pretty effective tank. Hydra, pretty effective AA tank, like 4 guns strapped on top. Like,
And I think
sure.
that's it out of the Chimeras in this book.
Oh, there is one more.
Oh, there is?
The Manticore.
Ooh.
Guess what?
It's the same thing, isn't
It's
it?
the same thing, yeah. It's actually got the same turret and everything as the Hydra does. The Manticore just fires different types of missiles, which, yeah, there we go. And we actually even see that
Oh
they
yeah,
have
we can
different
also
things
talk
like
about the Death
incendiaries.
Strike missile as well, which is a nuclear warhead.
Yeah, which is the nuclear warhead, which I don't even think existed by the time this
did
book
not.
came out. Yeah, it did not. That's so the
Well, technically it existed because it was in Epic, but it didn't exist on tabletop until like 5th edition.
yeah, early 2000s. But yeah, like having missiles used as an anti-air role, that is definitely a thing.
And we know these ones are kept further back because they need to be resupplied as quickly as possible.
Yes, there is something that always bothers me when people play guard, and it's missiles versus rockets. In the real world, there is a difference. A rocket is essentially a dumb-fired munition, so it is going to fire in whatever line you point it at,
And that's it.
not do anything else. A missile usually has an ability to correct its flight or to actually track a target. So that's the main difference. So when you look at things like the Katyusha rocket salvo truck, which it is Russian engineering to the extreme. It's essentially just a like farm truck with a giant tube like series on the back, and they just electrically fire a bunch of rockets, and they all just fire off in a giant like cavalcade of calamity.
But it is hilarious.
It's hilarious. The sound it makes is crazy. I've got to see a recreation of one fired once, and it is just like the most like.
It's kind of like a Watcha.
It kind of is like the Korean Hwacha, which was a rocket-fired arrow dispensing machine, but like it's like you take the 4th of July and you point it at someone. That's like a rocket battery.
America!
Yeah, like if you have ever taken a Roman candle, do not do this, pointed it at your friend and fired it on the 4th of July. This is America. Let's be real. We know it happens. That's essentially a rocket. It is going the direction you point it, and only physics will interact with it beyond a certain point.
And missiles track.
A missile is tracked or is guidable in some direction. It has control surfaces with which it can actually correct its flight path more than just stabilizers to make it spin and make it more accurate. So that's my rant about missiles versus rockets.
But again, completely feasible vehicle.
Yeah, totally feasible, like firing a rocket or firing a missile. I almost did it myself.
Well, there you go.
Wow. But yeah, firing a missile off a tank, totally a thing that you could do.
A
And like,
big ass missile like this would definitely take down an aircraft.
yeah, it would. And like, it wouldn't need to be that big, considering we know the size of these vehicles. Like, that is a big missile.
Well, they could be used to take down like low orbit
Yeah.
spaceships.
Yeah, which I think is kind of what they have in mind. Of everything in 40K is so much bigger. Like the Marauder bomber is massive. So
Yeah.
this could take down one of those fairly easily. And I guess that's kind of the entire point behind it.
Like the Tau Manta.
Yeah, like the Tau Manta and stuff like that. And we do see that they have other types of munitions.
So, with all of that said, that is the Chimera's vehicles and variants. And in fact, if you watch our first video, and technically the second, because I accidentally messed it up.
Yeah.
It was an oopsie-daisy, you can see the munitions in the first 2 episodes of this. So if you want to know what these are, look at those episodes. And yeah, are you surprised?
I was a lot more surprised when we started doing this. I did a little bit more research into the Chimera than the Lehman Russ or whatnot. We really just winged those ones. But the Chimera being so close to modern day versions of like infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers, I was like, oh, okay, it's somewhat doable. The speed was the one part that was really weird. But
It's fast.
that's MacGuffin, MacGuffin energy right there.
And just really quick, I do want to point out the things that we talked about in this video was we assumed all of them had track guards on up to these points here. So all of this was covered. So only the very edges here and this came out. And we also assumed the skirt would be this high on the vehicle. So that way all of this would be exposed so the tires would actually have some give.
Yep.
They are tires technically, right?
They're wheels.
Wheels.
Wheels is the proper term for it.
So the tracks and everything were properly exposed just a little bit, which allowed it to traverse the terrain that it needed to traverse. Otherwise, this thing would be dragging its hull on the ground, and no.
Not going anywhere, yeah.
So we did.
We did make those assumptions for the sake of argument because no one likes pointing out the same design flaw 15 times.
Yeah, because that's in all the vehicles. I mean, we can even see it most prevalently on the Land Raider, which is the most useless Imperial vehicle.
Yeah, and we will 100% get to the Higgins boat with tracks, but that is not for today.
No. So, once again, Sterling, I want to thank you for joining me for this lovely adventure into the Chimera and all of its variants. That was educational and actually a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm having a lot of fun doing this, so as long as you want to keep having me on, you just let me know.
I can't wait to start doing the Tyranid ones with you.
Yeah, yeah.
We're going to have to look up bipedal walkers, you know that, right?
Yeah, so many bugs. So many bugs, so many things.
Oh, and what about giant snakes? How does a tank engage a giant snake? That is going to be fun. We're going to have to look up a whole bunch of stuff for that one. As always, check out all the links in the description down below. Comments, tell us everything. Become that military expert that you never dreamed that you were. And tell Sterling that he's wrong about everything, even though you probably have a history level education.
Whoa. Okay, come on, I'm sure there's one or two who will point something out that I did get wrong.
Yes.
But law of averages is a thing, so.
I'm sorry. I am just joking, obviously. But comment in the comment section down below. Follow me on all the links in the description down below. If you're super awesome, check out my Patreon. As always, NornQueenAlexis. I love you guys. Bye.